Please welcome Mirabella Brocate El-Bazzi of Semafor.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us at Semafor World Economy. I'm Mirabella Brocate El-Bazzi, Chief Brand and Strategy Officer here at Semafor, and we're so delighted to welcome you. Semafor was launched just 3 years ago at a time defined by information overload, eroding trust, and accelerating complexity. We set out to provide the antidote, fair-minded, transparent, and global intelligence for the new world economy. Semafor World Economy brings our vision to life. It's now the largest gathering of global CEOs in America. This year alone, we'll convene over 500 global CEOs, 25 G20 finance ministers and central bankers, a quarter of the US Senate, and hundreds of top leaders from across business and government across over 90 countries. The discussions that you'll hear across this week, or have already heard across this week, are powered by Semafor's global newsroom, who've all gathered here from across our bureaus in Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Gulf. Our conversations will focus on helping leaders navigate today's extraordinary complexity by really surfacing and curating the richest insights, ideas, and perspectives on the new world economy. This afternoon's session, Fortifying Resilient Global Systems, will examine how and why building resilience is no longer just about restoring the status quo. It's about redesigning the systems that ultimately underpin global stability, from power grids and ports to digital networks and financial safety nets. The question now is how to construct systems capable of not only absorbing disruption, but of emerging stronger from it. I'd like to express our gratitude to Mubadala for their founding partnership on this track. We are so grateful for their ongoing support in helping us create a space for independent and intelligent live journalism. And with that, let's get to the news.
Please welcome Cristobal Valenzuela of Runway and Rohan Goswami of Semafor.
Chris, thanks so much for joining us today. For those of you who don't know, Runway is a company, and I'll maybe let you explain this, but essentially you're trying to bring AI and generative AI into the filmmaking and into the industrial world. And tell us a little more about the filmmaking side of that, because I feel like that's an area that's attracted a lot of controversy among the creative classes over the last few years.
It has, but things are changing fast. So we've been working on what we call world models for quite some time, and we've been very deep into Hollywood for also a couple of years. And the way we approach it is really to try to make AI systems and AI models that can help the creative class and creative people just do more work better and faster. Today, we work with every single studio out there. We work with a lot of filmmakers, a lot of creative talent that are using these tools on a daily basis. I think most of the kind of like early skepticism or early complaints do come from a place of mostly fear understanding. And I think most of those considerations have passed because people have figured out that these are just very powerful tools.
You think the fear from artists, or whether it's GFX or VFX, that's passed?
Absolutely. I mean, there's still, of course, a small minority of people who are thinking about, the long-term consequences of jobs. But I think if you speak largely through the studios, the people working in the media, in the industry, most of them have already experienced the technology.
But the economics of Hollywood are already pretty brutal, depending on how you slice it and how you account for it. But those studios have continually looked for any way they can to save cost. And I'm curious, if we're not at the point now, I don't think, where it's more cost effective, but at some point we will be. And so what do graphics jobs, what do design jobs look like in a world where entire scenes can be procedurally generated?
Right, so a couple of things. The first one is these tools are already reducing the cost significantly. It's happening right now in productions.
Right now?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like companies and movies are being made that are...
And is that on the labor side? Is that on the render side?
It's everywhere. It's on the pre-production side, it's in scripting, it's in planning, it's in execution, visual effects. And so these tools are already getting deployed at scale. But the issue of labor and like jobs, I would say on the Hollywood side, actually has nothing, the one we're seeing right now and the budget skyrocketing and the considerations where the industry is, have more to do with other issues of streaming and the way you consume and you compete in the market, and streaming services has less to do with AI. I think the AI kind of side effect will come over the next year or two.
You're talking about the disputes that actors might have with streamers. But you guys have an adjacent dispute there, in that the corpus of work that your models, that other models have been trained on, it's a real point of contention about whether you guys have to pay for those works or not, and license those work, which in many cases, it's been shown, are copyrighted works or are people's intellectual property. As you're creating IP for these studios, simultaneously, isn't there a world where they're also suing you for training upon their data? I mean, are you facing any litigation around that right now?
No, we're a lot of the conversation on copyright has now moved to outputs. So what studios and IP holders care the most is about IP. Like, I think most media companies and studios are recognizing that the future of this industry is on IP. If you have recognizable things people like, that's probably the most valuable part. And every company is in the IP business. And so what you want to do is you want to get out there to your customers and your viewers more often and more regularly in ways that are more economically feasible.
Beyond, say, a 2-hour movie streaming or a studio or a movie theater.
Correct. So if you're spending $100 million on making one feature film, which is 90 minutes, imagine taking $100 million and spending it on 50 movies. Same quality, same amount of output, visually, but you make way more content. So you have way better chances of hitting something. It's a quantity problem.
Doesn't this take some of the magic out of it, though? I mean, the idea that you're now suddenly scaling up, and 90 times 100 is 9,000 minutes or 900 minutes of content here.
Well, I think that's actually what we need right now. There's a crisis of creativity in the industry because of the economic incentives of how the content is being made. And this, by the way, is not new. I mean, if you think about production of any type of media, people were freaking out, and this is true, when industrial publishing became a thing, because kind of that same argument around was how many books are you going to read? We have 2,000 books being published. You know how many books are published today? Around 25 million books per year. Of course, I don't read 25 million books, and I don't expect you to.
No.
But
24 maybe, 25.
But the world is in a much better place because there's more people who manage to tell a story or say something on the world because technology has allowed them to do so. We have this internal saying at Runway that the best movies are yet to be made because we haven't heard from probably the billions of people who haven't had access to this very small technology and this very small amount of access to make stories that people want to watch. And so I think AI will actually, right now it's becoming an incredibly good solution to this crisis that I would say Hollywood is going through.
You are a creative by training. I'm always sort of curious, when we started seeing these generative AI videos, you could always kind of tell, right? They had that weird sort of psychedelic, uncanny valley sheen to them. And now we've moved past that, and they're photorealistic, and they're almost indistinguishable from reality or from certainly sophisticated renders. Is there a clear artistic language you see in what you generate? You've compared it, I think, to a camera, right? You've said this is a new kind of camera.
Yeah, it is. And maybe for context, I started working on Runway quite some time ago, before AI was actually working in the way it's working right now. And so we've learned a lot about the process and the grammar of how you make things with the systems. And a good analogy I use a lot in LA and in Hollywood and with media is to really think about this as a tool, right? Think about this as a camera. And if you think about the impact the camera had on society, culture, it was probably unprecedented. We first of all created a new art form. So cinema is a new art form, photography is a new art form that was born out of science. And it was very much contended and fought in the beginning of the 1900s for reasons that might sound very similar today, which is painters back then thought it was killing art. So it was the end of art. And this is true. People really resisted, I can't emphasize this enough, really resisting photography. It thought the world was going to end because there was no soul in photography, in this machine-made pictures. And I think a lot of that sentiment is now put into AI. But if you think about what photography did, photography invented a new art form by creating a new grammar of how people could use the technology to shape a story. And the way that you tell stories is not in cameras, is not by painting. You need to invent something new. You need to invent focus and composition and light.
Right.
You create new things and you understand the world differently. AI for me is very similar. The way you create is a new grammar altogether, and that's being shaped right now.
I would be hopelessly outmatched if I tried to have a philosophical discussion about the nature of art with you. So I'm going to do what all reporters do and just pivot away from that subject very quickly. But in part because you actually have two very different businesses that you're running. One is for let's call it the creative classes. Sure. The other, and this is something that the CEO of Michelin was talking with me about yesterday, is helping manufacturers and industrial facilities figure out what to do with their robots, which is not really something I'd ever thought of as a use case for AI. Can you explain to me, I guess, first what that business is, and then of those two businesses, which to me seem to be very different, which do you think represents a better growth, a higher total addressable market for you?
I mean, both are big and both are important for us. So maybe the best place to start is to understand why and how we can serve both. And it all goes back to this idea of world models. So a world model, without going too much into technical details, is this idea that you can train AI systems that understand the world and perceive the world and connect in the world maybe in the same way that we do, right? So when you learn about the world, you're watching the world and you're learning about it by seeing things, right? So we do the same. We give the model video data and we show it enough video so the model understands how physics works, how objects work, how things move in a world. And then we can ask the model to create what I call amazing videos or entertaining videos, which is media side. You make movies, you make shows. But you can also ask the model to make what I call boring videos, videos you don't want to watch. And videos you don't want to watch are 17 hours of objects being moved on a table. You probably no one here wants to watch that.
Sounds dreamy.
But there's one thing that might want to watch many hours of that, which is robots. So robots, we're creating videos for humans to watch, and now we're creating videos for robots to watch. And those videos are now becoming the ground kind of like truth on which models are learning around the world. So if you want to train a model to pick a bottle, you need to show it videos of that picking the bottle. Instead of you collecting and recording that, I can create a video, a synthetic video, a generative video of that robot or you picking the bottle. And I can then use that video to train this, and it works. And the robot, it's kind of insane that it works, but the robot is learning about a dream. It's learning about something that doesn't exist, and it's using that data to actually work, and it works. And we can deploy it, and it works, and the performance that it was actually watching real stuff.
Before we turn to the economics of your business, I am just curious, when I think about the intersection of robotics and AI, I think automotive. That's sort of where I go. That's where my head goes, and we've seen a lot of partnerships there. What other industries or sectors do you think this is really applicable to and will be transformative over the next few years?
So it's we actually have this field of like media as one part of a business and what we call physical AI. So physical AI is robots on the one end and then autonomous systems. So the same principles might apply to autonomous vehicles. If you've been to SF or now I think Waymo's now in New York as well, there are many other car companies doing this. If you want to deploy autonomous systems that can drive themselves on streets, you need to collect data, basically put cameras and have these cars navigate through the world. Again, same problem. You need video data. So the biggest bottleneck on performance and improvements on robotics and physical AI is video data. It's data. Mm-hmm. And here's like a new approach. You can just synthetically create the data. And so we're also doing versions of that with autonomous vehicles. And I think there's a lot of promising results we're seeing so far.
Turning to sort of the economics of AI, starting with the macro, I guess, there is this tension, right? OpenAI is more business to customer, B2C. Anthropic is maybe more B2B. And this is, as a reporter, you look for tension everywhere. This is sort of the tension of which business model wins. It seems to me that you could really do either. I would love to generate funny videos. I'm sure your movie customers would love that too. Which lane do you see yourself in? It seems like more B2B.
It is, yeah. I think we're focusing a lot on like what we call prosumers and enterprises. Again, we're selling to studios and agencies and brands and now robotics companies and also gaming studios. But the interesting thing about AI is that, and this is just generally about the market altogether, is that the distinction between the consumer and the prosumer and the enterprises are blending. Mm-hmm. Because now what used to require armies of people, you can just do it by one person.
Sure.
And so that same thing is becoming, I think, kind of like a common thread in all industries. Software, you mentioned cloud, and video, like Runway, and there's many other industries in which you can kind of do both. You can work a little bit with consumers to drive adoption, great awareness, but also sell like really enterprise solutions to them.
Well, so then is this a fallacious question to ask you then, if I were to say which model in your mind at scale wins, whether it's B2B or B2C? It sounds like you would just reject the premise.
No, so I think the one that wins are the ones that can balance another set of kind of elements. This idea that you need to explore, which is you need to create net new models. We have, I don't know, we created this net new model that allows you to run video in real time, which has never been done at this scale before. I can create video on a real-time basis. I can show you something. Imagine you go into Netflix and you watch something that's being generated as you're watching it. That you can do that today.
How do you charge for that?
We're figuring it out. That's part of the business. You have to figure it out.
Initial early thoughts on what that model looks like?
So it's, I mean, consumption. You can just like charge per hours of minutes if you're watching something. Because at the end of the day, you're paying compute. So if you need to translate that into compute. Now,
so then is your margin just whatever you charge over the cost of your compute? I mean,
right, but cost of compute is going down and optimizations of the models themselves are also getting better. So you can squeeze more for each compute unit that you have. And ideally you want to get to a point where the customer and whoever is experiencing this might not even have to think about.
I mean, it sounds like the economics are just, you have to be 5% cheaper than the cost of a human to do it.
I mean, first, you can't do that, first of all, with a human. Like, there's no way someone is going to, like, make a movie whilst you're watching the movie. This, like, physically you can't,
well, of
right?
course.
We're limited technologically by doing that. So my point is, like, the companies that can invent that and can also be good at optimizing it continuously are probably in a good position because you can use the resources to train and create new frontiers, and things are moving very fast, but also be the one, like, deploying those products so people can actually use them, and you learn from that all the time.
I guess from a competitive perspective, though, you look at OpenAI, it raised $122 billion. I think that's 20 times your valuation or 10 times your valuation. How do you actually get the compute?
We buy the compute.
But how do you compete with them when they are hoovering up, when them, Anthropic, Grok are hoovering up so much of the data center capacity?
Yeah, I mean, it's getting competitive. The way you do it is well, first of all, you need capital, so we raise money. And secondly, you do deals and partnerships that are like multi-year partnerships with cloud companies. And so it's competitive, but there's, I think, compute for many other companies that just the two of them that you just mentioned.
Right. Chris, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me.
Welcome Kate Barton of Dentons, Jacob Silverman of Kroll, and Rohan Goswami of Semafor.
We are here with the CEO of Dentons, which is the largest law firm, I think, in the world, and Kroll, where all you guys is think about risk. I want to start with you, just because there's been a lot in the news. I'll pick on Sam Altman for a second, maybe not pick on, but there has been a remarkable uptick over the last 2 years in the threats that CEOs themselves personally face. We're in a room, in a building filled with CEOs. Does it feel like Americans have more antipathy, more antagonism towards chief executives now?
Wow, you're starting off with a doozy.
You guys manage risk, man, and I got a lot of questions for you.
I think the short answer is it certainly feels that way.
Yeah.
And I think that there has been growing concern, particularly as people are focused on issues of inequality and stratification of wealth and so forth, to have that directed towards CEOs and the C-suite. And as a result, I do believe, and there have been tragic examples that we all know about over the past 18 months, that one of the most important activities of a board and of a C-suite is to shore up its physical defenses. And I'm somewhat preaching our own book because we do advise on that, but I do believe that it is absolutely essential.
Yeah. I want to press you on one more thing, which is while there's also the physical threats, you and I were talking about this in the green room, AI has completely transformed what the truth is and what we believe or know to be true. We just had the CEO of a company that generates procedurally videos for Hollywood, but I could put together a very convincing deepfake of the three of us on stage right now saying things we never said. How do you manage that risk when that sort of platform and that surface is basically infinite? It's anyone with a phone or a computer.
Well, first of all, I can't tell you how many times Jake Silverman has asked one of our colleagues to wire them funds.
Yes, the rite of passage in Semafor.
And it happens pretty much every week, if not every day. But for many years, that ability to phish and deepfake has been pretty rudimentary. And education would largely, certainly not fully, largely be able to combat a significant portion of it. Now, with the sophistication of AI and the ability to really do highly resonant, video imagery of someone like me and my beautiful face, it becomes much harder. However, there is technology to identify that and combat that, combined with education, which I do think can still help companies shore up their defenses.
Kate, lawyers know a thing or two about managing risk. I'm curious how you advise, and we can talk about some of the specific conflicts going on in a bit, but generally how it's been possible or how you think about advising clients about the long term over the last 2 years when the short term, even the next day or the next week, is so choppy and is so unclear.
It's a really good question, Rohan. It's probably the zillion-dollar question everyone has is, what changes should I make? Is it short-term change? What's going to happen in the midterm? Clearly, so much is being determined by the U.S. policy and the U.S. administration. We're having the midterm elections. What will happen then? And so a lot of companies are really just navigating, trying to make, so much of this impacts supply chain, and you can't change your supply chain quickly. So they're trying to discern which things can I do short term for right now that will mitigate the cost, and so I can get goods and services to where they need to get. And so we're trying to parse things, again, according to time frame, because most of the supply chain issues have to be solved for the longer term.
The sort of second and third order impacts that we're starting to see from the conflict in Iran specifically are financial and are markets related and how things move. You advise a broad swath of corporates, of investors. At what point do you think we'll start to see Middle Eastern companies or sovereign wealth funds trigger force majeures and start pulling out of whether it's projects, investment commitments? Have we already started to see that?
Well, we are doing a lot of work for clients that are looking at force majeure, contract provisions, insurance policies, supply chain disruption, just a lot of contract review. And so a lot of clients are asking for our advice. We have over 200 lawyers in the Middle East, and they're really in and of the communities that they serve. So our first priority was to make sure that they were safe. A lot of them are still working from home, sheltering from home. It's sort of like a COVID part 2, if you will, for many, because their children are at home. But they're fast at work, and they actually find solace in a time like this, being able to do their job and work. So there's no shortage of these types of issues. I think that I probably wouldn't be sitting on the stage if I could predict when we'll have certainty on a lot of this. But, there's no doubt there's a lot of companies asking questions and getting prepared. And I think whenever you're in a time like this, the more you're prepared, even if you don't have to invoke it, the better off you are.
Prep work is certainly important, but is there a tipping point at which you think, if it's now been 6-ish weeks since the U.S. started doing what it's doing in Iran, is there a tipping point at which we've already seen events get canceled? F1 got canceled, some of the financial forums have been canceled, where there's sort of an exodus similar to COVID, where there was one company that said we're going remote, then 2, then suddenly everyone. Is there a tipping point? Do you feel like we're nearing that tipping point around, again, investor commitments, projects? Are we getting closer to the brink?
I think there's still a lot of hope and people are resilient. So I think that, I think there's still a wait and see. So I don't know.
What do you see from that point of view?
There could be a tipping point. Obviously, if there is an attack on critical infrastructure or compromising of water supply and those types of issues. Personally, and I'm not a geopolitician, I think we are still a ways away from that. I think this is an incredibly resilient commercial community, a global community, who want to transact, to what Kate was discussing. They want to be working, and I believe that it will take a lot more than the current environment to cause that tipping point, to really cause a flight from the region.
Transactions, of course, require that you arrive at a valuation and that you're able to actually value assets. And how do you do, is M&A just completely frozen up right now in that region? Because how do you ascribe a value to an asset, which, to your point, the cost of insurance has gone up dramatically, or energy is an input and it's impossible to determine the actual cost of operation? How are you figuring out how to value fixed assets, companies, whether they're in the region or exposed to risk from that region?
Well, first, I think we have to remember that although this conflict is very fresh and it's obviously headline grabbing, and you can see the gyrations and the direct correlation between oil and public equity prices, that it has only been a few weeks long, and in fact there have been signs already that there's a path towards at least a short, if not medium-term resolution. And I think that right now to transact in the heat of the moment today is a very different question than starting to plan for effectively an off-ramp, which I think the various powers that be are very focused on finding, to transact over the next few months. And I do think that we'll see some equilibrium.
I think as a human, as an M&A reporter, we're all hopeful that there is some sort of stability, but almost exactly a year ago, if I had had you on stage, you'd be saying, I think something similar about tariffs. Well, we see that there's an off-ramp, we see that there are ways forward. That has not really abated at all. Companies are constantly having to reinvent supply chains, move things around. It's a bit better, sure, but it took weeks or months of uncertainty to get there. I'm curious if you think companies have faith in what the government says anymore, whether it's this government or any government in the region, and whether they are actually able to plan and make decisions based on what they're hearing from folks in this town.
Well, I won't speak to whether or not they have faith in any government, at least not in this room. But the framework that I talk about with our people and with our clients is a simple acronym that some of you might know called VUCA, which stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. And that basically means that none of us really have any clue what's going to happen tomorrow, next week, next year. Sure. But if you embrace the idea that we are living in a VUCA world, which we absolutely are, and it might feel even more so now, then you can start to create a framework around how to actually move forward and not be subject to paralysis. The first few days after Liberation Day, a year and 15 days ago, effectively, there was paralysis. But over the course of the subsequent several weeks and then certainly months, people were able to operate in an environment that had a heightened level of what I characterize as the VUCA index. And in fact, transactions started to happen at pace. Equity markets, notwithstanding the environment that we're in, are effectively at an all-time high.
It did feel like M&A last year, at least in the U.S., was kind of idiosyncratic. It was John Waldron last fall said to my colleague Liz, sort of once in a generation, once in a lifetime deals. Deals in highly regulated environments, railroads, movie studios, mega deals, but not the volumes that we were used to historically. Kate, I want to start with you. When you look at clients and their ability or their willingness to transact, do you feel like there's an appetite for the kind of volume, the kind of intensity we saw across sectors, or do you think it will be limited to the high ticket price deals that we saw last year?
I think that we were set up until this particular conflict for a really good year on M&A deals, and there was a lot more volume. But I think the uncertainty right now has made it just a little more trepidation. But I've seen these things flip if things get settled quickly. So I think it'll be somewhere in between, not just the big deals, but there's been so much delay in a lot of transactions or deferred transactions that now folks really want to go. I'd watch the public offerings. I mean, there's just a lot of pent-up demand. So I think that we'll see a good year in deal making. A lot of shopping, too. I would say that in a time like this.
Window shopping? Or
shopping for acquisition. So that creates a lot of opportunities for due diligence, and so maybe they're not purchasing, but there is a lot of looking, and so that is something I'm observing right now. People will try to time when they make the acquisition.
Is there opportunity for the right kind of buyer here, do you think? Are there spaces where if you're smart and disciplined, you can actually make great strategic moves right now in this sort of VUCA environment?
I think VUCA always creates opportunity. When there's dislocation and an emotional flight, often not sort of born out of empirical fact, that can create sort of idiosyncratic moments for players to swoop in. And there's many industries that have fallen into that dimension, so to speak, over the years and decades. I think the most recent one certainly is software. Yeah. With the advent of with AI, and certainly over the past few weeks and months, that's become kind of the industry in vogue to view as being sort of in the basement. But there are still many, many great businesses in that sector that will figure out a way to thrive.
You've teed me up beautifully for our next tack. Both of you guys operate in very human-intensive businesses, and they're expensive humans. Lawyers are not cheap. Risk professionals are not cheap. These are not sort of people you can find on the street. How does AI change, Jacob, I'll start with you. How does it change, first of all, how you charge for the work that you do, but then also how you hire for that work and how you train people and develop people and mentor people in this game?
So first of all, they are not cheap, and they remind me of that every day. At the end of the day, for us, and I believe this in my gut, and I'm not a technologist, that we are ultimately a people-first organization, and that what everyone in this room hires us for, and I'm sure hires Kate and her great firm for as well, is ultimately the human judgment that we apply to a particular problem or opportunity. And that ability to apply that human judgment at the premium level of service that we engage in, I do not see going away. The ability for AI to support our workflows and to make our workflows more efficient and to take out a layer where that human judgment is not important is evident, and we are deploying it everywhere we can for that purpose, but not to replace our end product.
Kate, law feels particularly threatened. Over the last 10 years, there's been a real push, not just by firms like yours, but K&E, Latham & Watkins, to get larger and larger and larger, to charge more and more and more for associates to bill hundreds or thousands of dollars, and to have 100 associates on a big project. And it's really lucrative. Profits per equity partner have never been higher. But it seems to me that a lot of the work that junior lawyers do, document review, red lines, can be done pretty easily by AI. Is the world going to look, for the legal world anyways, a lot more like Wachtell, where you charge success fees and you're not really charging by the hour? Or is there a way for the conventional sort of hourly billable model to continue to exist 2 years from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now?
Rohan, I think there'll be a hybrid of sort of a little of both. I mean, the billable hour as well as some kind of value-based where the technology costs are incorporated. But, this is a huge opportunity, and our clients are embracing it. At first, the clients were, don't use it, very, very reluctant. Now we're getting incredibly complex instructions on how they want us to disclose the usage of AI. So we're taking a look at it. We're very AI positive at Dentons. We've come up with global guidelines on how we want to use it around the world. We're in 87 countries, so it's important that we cover the ground from that regard. But we're looking at sort of modernizing our back office, and so being super efficient with how we do HR, finance, et cetera, using all the tools that are out there. And then, really putting in the hands of our people safe AI tools with the clear instructions. They own the results. And I keep telling the young lawyers, the new grads, that my message is, listen, I don't think AI is going to replace the young lawyer, but I think that AI could replace the lawyer that doesn't use AI. Mm-hmm. So use it, become an expert in using it, really know how to prompt it, get the best results, but know what it's doing. You've got to own the work.
It's interesting, right? AI came for, in many ways, the people who created it. Young graduates who studied computer science are finding it harder to get jobs. Do you think, you guys have thousands of lawyers, do you think that you will hire fewer new grads, fewer new trainees around the world because there's just less of a need for that workforce?
You have to plan not only for the short term, so there might be some investment that you need to make over time so that you have those lawyers that you need midterm and long term. I mean, I just wouldn't underestimate what is nice for a young lawyer is they're not going to have to do repetitive work that many had to do at the beginning. And so they can really jump charge their, I'll call it, I hate to call these soft skills, we need a new name for this because it's not soft. It's what really differentiates a good lawyer. It's your emotional quotient. It's, reading a room. It's understanding what's a brilliant outcome, not just an average one. And what I see is AI right now is solving for problems in the bell curve. It comes up with decent answers, but where the real edge is for the lawyer who can take what the AI did, make sure it's right, not hallucinating, and then add to it something that the client really wanted so they get this outsized outcome. And so, teaching younger lawyers that kind of a skill earlier is huge.
You can't charge it the way you can. It might take a solicitor 12 hours to come up with a great briefing, and if AI can do 90% of it in 15 minutes, you're not charging for the full 12 hours, are you? How do you make are you?
No.
How do you make money off of that?
I think that, we're doing a lot of education with our clients. We have to talk about the technology spend. These tools are not inexpensive. There's a lot of tech companies here. And so we've got to pass on that cost as well as the human cost. And so, we're experimenting with a lot of different solutions in different parts of the world.
Final existential probe for you here. I've yet to meet a GC or a board member who is happy with their legal bill, which only gets bigger and bigger every year. Is the future just going to look smaller? Are you going to become cheaper and more accessible for these guys, or is it just going to keep on going up and up and up and up?
I think it's all going to become focused on value. And so it's fee for value. And, a lot of people complain, but they're really actually happy with the outcome they got. Complaining is in vogue.
That is, you are talking to a reporter. That is what we do professionally. Jacob, there's been a lot of talk in this panel and generally about Iran. I'm curious what you're hearing from clients about their appetite or their willingness to operate in China. There's been a real push, Starbucks chiefly among them, to get out of that market, a market that was seen as the most fertile market, just a few years ago. What are you seeing? What are you hearing from folks in that arena?
I think that stance continues. It's been sidelined by other aspects of geopolitics, certainly. And I saw an article today that we're that we had been in a bit of a détente with China, and perhaps this recent conflict could end that. I think we and our clients are treading with great caution. Now, we operate in China, and we have been. We are careful about further deployment of resources. We're very focused on data protection and people protection. But that's the general stance that we see continuing.
Kate, you guys had a partnership with China's largest law firm, which you dissolved, and now my understanding is you dissolved this in 2023 and have kind of picked it back up again. What's your read on the future of that market, and not only for your clients, but also for you in terms of your business in that region?
So there are a lot of Chinese multinationals that need help, legal services around the world. We continue to serve those, and there's still a lot of multinationals in the United States and around the world that need assistance in China. So we continue. Business is global, and so we want to do things prudently and following all the laws, but we want to serve our clients. That's really the Denton's promise, is that we're in all these countries for a reason, to help our clients.
Kate, Jacob, thank you so much for being great sports about this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
It was really great.
Thank you. Thanks.
Please welcome Scott Strazik of GE Vernova and Liz Hoffman of Semafor.
Hi, Scott.
Liz,
Thanks for joining us.
thanks for having me.
So NVIDIA's CEO said a few months ago that he knew he was basically holding up the entire AI ecosystem and by extension the entire economy. But there's an argument to be made that you are, that aside from GPUs, the hottest commodity in the world is a GE Vernova turbine that generates the power that we all need. How are you investing to meet that demand? How are you balancing the risk that the big tech companies are thinking about too of overbuilding versus FOMO versus underinvesting? Because you're a little downstream of them, or upstream of them.
You bet. I mean, over the next 3 years, we're going to invest $11 billion into growing our business in both R&D and CapEx to meet this moment. The reality is we don't have a lot of concern on overbuilding, because when we really look at, as example, the U.S. and really think about the build that we are driving, even if there's certain data centers that the economics don't make sense, this country needs more electrical infrastructure for the country to thrive. I mean, we have about 1,200 gigawatts of power capacity in the U.S. 200 gigawatts of it is still coal every day. The economics of that coal will be retired. So even if some of the data center build, for some reason, and I don't believe this, but if you want to underrate the tougher case, isn't needed for the electrons, the incremental natural gas that we're building today is going to be economically much more compelling for the country's existing electric power system. And it's also not just AI. I mean, we've got a lot of factory build as we create more redundancy in the system, as you go to the extreme of supply chain decoupling with China that requires more electrons. Heat pumps for homes, EVs, there's a lot of drivers. It's not just AI.
Do we have a lot of that? Because actually, I think year-over-year manufacturing construction is down. It's obviously a priority of the administration. Are you getting calls from industrial companies saying, we haven't put a shovel in the ground yet, but we just want to make sure that if we did, that the power is there?
More extreme than that there's shovels in the ground that are at risk of not being operational because the electrons aren't going to be there. I mean, even when you think about the foundries that are being built, chip factories, as an example, that are highly electro-intensive, that risk exists if we don't ramp up to meet that type of manufacturing growth, which is significant.
Is there a risk that the demand is there, as you say, but that the efficiencies get really good, that over time we've been doing more and more with fewer electrons?
I think that is almost a given, that is going to be where we're rooting for that efficiency definitely takes place. But you have to just, again, take a step back and say, the world is only getting about 20% of its energy every day from electric power. The other 80% is still coming from the molecule, from coal for both heating and industrial applications. There are very few people that argue that the 20% of the world's energy that's coming from electric power shouldn't double. So we're long that the world needs more electric power and that it's going to need many different forms of that technology, whether it be the combination of gas, nuclear, wind, and investing in all of them, along with investing in the grid.
It's funny, I don't think the CEO of General Mills says, I hope people get more efficient about their Cheerios consumption. What is it? Most people who are selling a product actually benefit from some inefficiency and overconsumption. What is it about your business that you hope that we are able to make the electricity that you're providing go further?
Well, because I think I thrive ultimately if my end customers thrive and if the countries that we're serving thrive. And I think by default, we want this technology to continue to become more efficient and more productive. And then as the economies and as the country becomes more competitive, we're going to benefit from that. So I just think at the end of the day, a more prosperous economy is ultimately going to need more electrons. And we are working very hard in many ways and also partnering with companies within the ecosystem to drive the efficiency of the systems. And that's why we talk more and more about being a very unique company that can not just provide the power generation equipment, but also the electrical equipment in concept, we're not there yet, power to the rack, that can drive a lot more efficiency and with it more competitiveness.
How do you decide who gets the turbines?
Economics really decide that. I mean, I think the customers that see the most attractive economics, that have projects that are most shovel ready. What I say every day is that we're not going to let a pedestal, as an example, if we're talking gas turbines, be sitting there without a gas turbine. If the plant is able to get built, if the gas is able to get there, we'll find the gas turbine. So the reality is what we do is primarily in a controlled environment. We make product in factories. We invest in those factories. That's, in some ways, the easier part. The harder part is actually building the plants and getting the communities on board and getting the system of systems together. But as those dots are connected, we will meet the moment and we will have the equipment available.
Is there a list price for one of these, or are big tech companies saying, I'll give you 5% more if I can get ahead of Google?
They're all a little bit different, because they all are being built in different environments with customers that have different specs, for sure. And timing matters, and admittedly, we are in a massive investment cycle right now to meet the moment with the customers that have this demand. So the economics are definitely evolving as we go.
Consumers are watching their electricity bills go up, and either rightly or wrongly blaming the giant energy sucking sound that is AI. Like, can you actually just sort of help us understand how much of that is because of this huge new demand from these big enterprise customers?
Minimal today. At the end of the day, electricity bills are going up primarily because we've underinvested in the grid over the last 50 years. And unfortunately, the electrical equipment with that grid is reaching the end of its useful life, and we need to reinvest in the grid. The power generation, generally speaking, in most parts of the country have been coming down, but utilities have had to reinvest in their grid, and that's what's leading to bills going up. Now, at the end of the day, if we do this right and build a more efficient system and make the right investments in our grid and have a more meshed system together that can make sure available electrons go to where it's most needed, costs will come down. Ultimately, costs will come down with big infrastructure builds, including with the data centers, in the context of the hyperscalers determining or committing to deferring some of their electrons back into the system when there's peak needs, when it's really hot in the summer or really cold in the winter. And that can stop the utilities from having to build incremental, what we call peak power plants, which are really expensive, but maybe are only used certain hours of the year. So that is this future chapter. It's not right now, because right now there's a huge investment cycle that we're having to pay for.
I say, is that contractual, or are we just counting on the big tech companies to throw some of their electrons back at us?
No, that is contractual. I mean, you've got 19 states that are building, a new economic model for exactly this to happen. So when sometimes we'll read headlines on PJM, the largest single system in the U.S., in the annual capacity markets, and what a customer can get paid to provide capacity into that system. There are new merchant models being built that industrial customers, including hyperscalers, can offer a certain amount of peak capacity and get paid for that, selling it back into the system.
I think it was that PJM auction a couple of months ago that actually sort of started this fear cycle a little bit, because it got filled up very quickly and the prices went up very fast.
Each of the last 3 years, that auction has led to a higher and higher price. And that, in some ways, can be a false positive, because the reality is that capacity payment in its own right isn't enough to incentivize new build. And that's why the discussion shifted in the last few months towards separate large load models, where there could be a different auction and a different mechanism for a hyperscaler to come in and sign a long-term 15-year contract versus being hoping for energy providers to build only on that capacity auction, which on its own isn't sufficient to fund new build.
You're talking about the grid. You just did a grid deal, just bought Prolec. Are you going to make more moves into the transmission and electrification part of the...
We'd like to. I mean, for context, everyone, we just spent $5.3 billion primarily securing 3 large factories in the U.S. for transformers. There's also 2 in Latin America. And these are important assets for us now. At the end of the day, we can work really hard on power generation equipment, but if we don't have the electrical equipment to translate the power generation equipment to the grid, it's not worth a lot. And one of the biggest long lead items and most complicated electrical pieces of the system right now are the transformers. So we could cry in our beer over that, or we could fix it. And by spending this money, we see real opportunity to better integrate our electrical equipment with the power generation equipment and serve the country in a more efficient way.
There's a lot of conflict zones in the world right now, and if we get to the other side of them, is that an opportunity for you to participate in reconstruction and rebuilding in places like Ukraine, Venezuela, Iran, Cuba?
We certainly hope so. We've had teams that have been in Venezuela in the last few months, and the teams are highly motivated with the work and the opportunity. We've done work in Ukraine over the last few years with mobile power and with some substation work to try to support the country, and we would most definitely do the same in the Middle East. What I would say is through a crisis like Ukraine or what we're experiencing in the Middle East right now, it makes it that much more clear that energy security is national security. And part of energy security is using technologies with the resources you have efficiently to have as much optionality and independence as possible. And generally, that is a bull case for growing our business and giving us opportunities to serve those markets. Now, at the moment, that's not where our minds are. It's on protecting and taking care of our employees in these locations. But over the long term, yes, these are growth catalysts for us.
You say energy security is national security. I mean, the end point of that, like if the White House said to you, you can't sell these abroad anymore, we need them here. How do you, is that something you think is on the table? How do you respond to that?
We say that we'll meet the moment in this country and produce as much electrical equipment as needed. And we are committed to that, and I'm committed to that as the CEO of the business.
Tariffs on steel, aluminum affect the inputs into a lot of what you're building and a lot of what the things that you're building go into, that are being built. A year after Liberation Day, the numbers all over the place. What have you actually seen? And have you made any specific moves in your business to sort of reorient things and respond?
Our costs have gone up. You know, we've talked about $250 million last year. It could be $250 to $350 million of incremental expense that we are incurring through the tariffs. We've shared that with our investors. No CEO likes higher cost. But at the end of the day, it's a reminder that we need to continue to invest in optionality and resilience of our supply chain. We have 23 factories in the U.S. That's the good news. So on a relative basis, we have a larger industrial footprint in this market than most of our competitors. But we have 100 factories globally. And they feed each other in different ways to drive productivity. And we're incurring incremental costs to serve this market, but we're going to get better every day and very much are focused on the affordability dynamic because I think in the end, that's what I aspire will differentiate Vernova. Right now, today, pricing and cost is going up because we're investing so much, but inside the company, we know that we need to drive to a level of productivity that brings costs down. And the good news is it's a lot easier to have that aspiration in a growth market. And this industry hasn't been growing from 2000 to 2025. It's growing now. So we can make the investments in our factories to transform how we make product that ultimately bring us down the cost curve. And I expect us to do that.
Those incremental costs don't seem to have hit your stock. It's one of the, I think, best performing stock in the S&P last year. Not that you are not in control of what people want to pay for your shares. You're for sale every day. But do you worry that investors are getting out over their skis on certain parts of this and you print a number that's a nickel off from where the street expected and you're having a bad day?
There isn't a day I walk into a room like this that our company isn't buying our stock because we see value in our stock.
I should say companies are notoriously bad repurchasers of their own stock. They often buy at the top and issue at the bottom.
Yeah, we're about 16 months into our buyback program, and our average purchase price is half of today's trading price. So we like our investments, and we'll continue to invest. While investing in things like what we talked about with the transformer factories, it's a combination of both. I believe great companies make investments for the long term inorganically, but they also do give their owners back some of the money they generate, and that's really what the buyback program is doing.
Very quickly, you're making a long-term bet on nuclear.
Yeah.
Why?
Because the world's going to need more baseload decarbonized power. The Western world has not built new nuclear in the last 15 years. but it's very hard to model to an end state with a complement of different products, including wind, solar, gas, nuclear, where we're going to get to a good decarbonized answer without nuclear playing a much larger proportion of the energy mix. Now, this decade, call it 26 to 30, we're going to be rebuilding a supply chain that had gone dormant. If we do our job in nurturing that supply chain and demonstrate that we can come down the cost curve in the next decade, 2030 to 2040, I believe it's going to be a very valuable part of GE Vernova and have immense value for both the U.S. and the countries that we build these plants. But it's going to take that long. This is a little bit of a longer game. We're building our first one right now in Canada. It'll be commissioned in 2029. I expect us to be in construction on our first plant in the U.S. before the end of the year here, and building in at least 2 European countries before the end of the year, or at least deep into the engineering process. So this is happening, but it's going to take a little bit of time.
We will have you at Semafor World Economy 2040.
Sounds great.
Thanks, guys.
Liz, thank you.
Welcome Vishal Garg of Better and John Hilsenrath.
Okay, it says here we have 15 minutes, so let's just start in a full sprint. Vishal, you're in the mortgage business. You just introduced a crypto product. Tell us how it works. We're going to be able to use cryptocurrency to start as an agent for borrowing for mortgages?
Yeah, I mean, what's really interesting is tokenization is revolutionizing the architecture of financial services. And to date, to get a mortgage, you have to put down cash as a down payment. So if you want to buy a $500,000 house, you've got to put up $100,000. But there are all these other financial assets that you own that you could, if it's on the right rails, pledge instead. So we've started in a partnership with Coinbase and with Fannie Mae to enable consumers to take Bitcoin and USDC and pledge that in lieu of cash for a down payment. This is great for consumers because it allows them to not have to sell and pay capital gains. It allows them to continue to have the value of the appreciation of the asset. But it doesn't stop there. Tokenization means like soon enough, you're going to be able to take Intel stock or Tesla stock or Apple stock or S&P 500 fund or a bond fund and effectively pledge that in lieu of down payment. And if you think about it, that just means that the 41% of the consumers that can afford to buy a home but don't have enough money for a down payment, but they own other assets, will be able to enter the housing market. And we think that that's a major solve for affordability.
You're talking about some really volatile assets here, Bitcoin, Intel stock. I mean, how is this going to work if you're lending against, say, Bitcoin and it drops 50%?
You're not just lending against the asset, but you're also lending against the home. So as long as a consumer makes their payments on time, everything stays as is. The entire concept of skin in the game, which is what a down payment is supposed to be in the concept of lending, why does it only have to be cash? Why can't it be cash equivalent or liquid assets? And that's what we asked ourselves. So for instance, in the United States, $15 trillion sits in the form of customer deposits, household deposits in the banking system. But outside the banking system, there's $35 trillion of assets in just equities and bonds. If we could take that, that's twice the size. We could dramatically expand the pool of assets available for down payment to buy a home, and it makes home ownership much more affordable and accessible, and that's what we were started to do.
All right, so for me, we were talking about this backstage, the most frustrating and annoying part of the mortgage process was title insurance. Yeah. When are you going to turn that into a token so I don't have to pay $1,500 to get a title?
Makes perfect sense. We actually have an AI title insurance product in partnership with Fannie Mae in a pilot. We're charging $75 for title insurance for a refinance versus $1,500, which is the average, because our AI is able to crawl and look at all of the public data and effectively do that for near minimum zero cost. So we're already putting $1,500 back, and we're working on trying to get that done for the purchase mortgage, where if, again, we charge $75, we'll save consumers $3,000 on buying a home.
Let's talk a little bit about artificial intelligence and how that disrupts the marketplace that you're in. Of course, we all know that AI isn't entirely new. We now have generative AI. You have a product called Tin Man.
Yes.
And another product called Betsy. It sounds to me like some kind of version of Wicked 3, maybe. But tell us how you're using AI, and in particular, what parts of the mortgage underwriting process still requires humans, and what parts can be disrupted, at least on paper, using old AI and new AI?
Sure. So our AI is built on top of $110 billion of loans funded, and all the underlying learning data that we've collected from having the only end-to-end platform in the industry for the past 10 years. 6 million customers, millions of recorded phone calls, billions of documents processed, and those are all manual key entered in before the advent of Gen AI. And now adding a Gen AI layer on top of all that learning data means that basically 99% of the tasks that stare and compare, looking at a pay stub, looking at the rules, calculating all that,
taking the facts or
taking the facts and all that stuff, all of that is done by the machine and by the AI agents, which is why our cost to manufacture a mortgage is 80% lower than the average in the industry. What we're doing instead, though, where that leaves room for the humans, is to actually consult the consumer. If you went to a bank 50 years ago, the loan officer would actually ask you, hey, how old are your kids? How long do you plan to stay in this house? Maybe, what do you think about your job prospects, your income prospects, all these things that effectively went away in the formocracy that exists today, right? Like, I think the mortgage business is formocracy on the front end and PDFocracy on the back end. And basically, ultimately, the cost to making a form or PDF should be near zero. That's what it is. And so how can you take that and empower consumers to buy a house that they can afford, to refinance when they should, to consolidate their debts across personal loans and credit cards and use their home equity to pay that off? Those are the things that we're using the time that is gained from AI to make better for consumers.
So in your industry, just thinking about the world of work and the job market, is there a future for human work, and how much human work will be left by the time this disruption is all done that we're talking about?
There are 550,000 licensed loan officers in the United States today. And our AI agent, Betsy, is already at feature parity or above 80% of them. So, those people need to be retrained to do something else. And so, I do think that there's a substantial retraining of the white-collar workforce that has to take place over time to do other tasks that are more focused on human empathy.
Unfortunately, our experience as a country over the last 25 years with retraining wasn't a very positive one. We found out that it was a difficult thing to do, to take a furniture construction manufacturing worker and turn that person into a phlebotomist or a nursing assistant. Do you see the kind of jobs Armageddon in your industry that people, economists, are out there warning about?
I think we didn't actually turn those people into nurses and phlebotomists. We turned them into administrators and bill payment collectors and all those sort of things. We gave them degrees that cost $200,000 and then sent them out in the job market to perform lower-end white-collar tasks in an office. They might be actually way better off making furniture. And we actually need people to make furniture. We need people to build houses. We need people to be electricians. And I think the fundamental challenge from a policy perspective is can we, for the next 25 years, train people to do jobs that the AI can't do?
And it sounds like you were saying earlier, in the mortgage industry, the part where there's still a human-facing element is, or where there's a need for human work is in the human interaction.
That's right.
From the customer to the individual who can kind of interact.
Yeah.
Let's talk about your own experiences with human interaction, okay? So as a leader and a builder, you've had your ups and downs, kind of building organizations and leading them. What have you learned from your own experiences about leading people and how to lead people through turbulent times.
Sure. I mean, I grew up in New York City. I started working on Wall Street when I was 14. I was on a trading desk. And so I think what I grew up around was a certain type of work style and ethos in investment banking and trading that doesn't necessarily translate into large organizations.
What was that ethos? Let's put our fingers on it.
The ethos was work really hard and make great things happen. And if you don't, then you're out of here, right? Sort of up and out. That's sort of it. But that doesn't. Yeah, but we went from a company with 10 people when we got started in 2016 to having 11,000 people by 2021. And the same motivations that compel some people to start a company or to join a startup aren't the same motivations that they join a 10,000 person company. And I think I've learned a lot about being a good manager rather than just being a good product person or a good financial innovation person.
So what have you learned?
To lead with empathy, to understand that your employee is just in a certain way like your customer, and then to treat the employee as well as I would treat my customer.
Right. And so if you were going to go back and talk to the guy who started Better in 2016, what would you tell him to do?
Be more patient with people, but not too patient.
All right, let's talk a little bit about the housing market. So we're in the spring selling season. What are you seeing in the marketplace? So we've been waiting for 3 years for housing to come back, for mortgage generation, home sales to pick up. What's it like out there?
Pre-approvals are up, so people are out there trying to buy a home and beat everyone else to buying a home, knowing that fundamentally the rates environment is likely to come down over time, whether it's a function of policy or a function of a slowdown in the global economy. And so, I personally believe a recession's coming, and recessionary times are the best time to stop paying rent and be your own landlord. And so we encourage our customers to go out there and go home shopping now while homes are available, supply has opened up, rather than wait the moment until rates go back down to lower levels to 4 or 5%, because at that time everyone else will be in the housing market.
There's a couple of pieces of this I want to drill down on. Why do you think a recession is coming?
You can see it in all of the underlying economic data, right?
Are you seeing it in your underlying economic data?
I think that there's going to be massive, continued downsizing in corporate America, and we see that, coming, and you see it in all the employment numbers, and people are stopping to drop out of the purchase market. Like what you're seeing is, I think someone just told me, Coachella, 80% of the tickets that consumers bought for Coachella that took place just last week are on buy now, pay later. The American consumer is stretched. We might not feel it in this room. We might still go to restaurants and they are all packed, but that's because you're going to that type of restaurant. You go to Chili's, go to Red Lobster, see how those are doing. Go to the Cheesecake Factory, which is aspirational. I grew up in Queens. That's where we go, right? To celebrate. And, people aren't shopping there anymore. People are dropping out. So you have a very small slice of America holding up the consumer economy, and even that slice is becoming slightly insecure about what's happening in the future. And I think as that translates out, if the rich stop buying stuff that they don't need, I think there's going to be a ton of damage.
And do you see that in the underlying application data that you're seeing it better?
We see people moving from other assets to buying a home. In inflationary times, in insecure times, buying a home is a good asset.
Right. So now let's talk about rates. You think rates are coming down. A lot of people are also talking about the inflation problem and how that's stretching consumers. Any concern that rates actually might go up in this environment when we've got oil prices, up 40, 50%, tariffs putting higher pressure on imported goods, services still seeing some inflation? How does that affect the marketplace that you're in if we don't get the decline in interest rates that you're talking about?
I think that's a great question. We're not expecting a decline to make our business great. We're continuing to drive AI innovation in an industry that basically the internet forgot. And we think that that's a secular growth trend. We think that consumers, the object of desire, we have over 3 million consumers we've approved over the past 2 years who want to go and buy a house. So the object of desire, if, for buying a home remains very, very strong. People said, hey, millennials don't want to buy a house, they want to be on Airbnb, they want to rent forever. That's actually not true. Like fundamentally, everybody wants to own a home. And I think that's a universal need. And so the way we think about rates is like they may go up, they may come down, they may stay the same. There's another fundamental trend taking place, what is happening in the stablecoin ecosystem and how the creation of the stablecoin assets has now created a new buyer universe for the US Treasuries and has helped actually compress rates for Treasuries by creating a new marginal buyer. That same stablecoin buyer is now entering into the mortgage market to buy Fannie Mae MBS, Freddie Mac MBS, all of that sort of stuff. And so again, Fannie Freddie MBS trades 200 basis points wider than Treasuries, even though it's like technically potentially a superior asset because not only do you have the full faith of the US government, you have that person and the house behind it. We think that that's a secular trend for mortgage rates coming down.
I want to finish up by talking about disruption. You are in the business of disruption. In the world of mortgages, in the world of housing, the idea of what you do, I think, is to disrupt the industry. We were talking backstage about the challenges to disruption. Incumbents who are protecting turf, regulatory challenges. You surprised me because my first instinct was to think that all this talk about AI and incorporation of AI is going to be a slower process than people expect because there'll be incumbents fighting for turf, because there'll be regulatory hurdles. You had a different view. What's your view?
If any of you bought a home, you've probably dealt with 5 or 7 or 8 people. If you're a regular consumer, when you first bought your first house, you probably dealt with anywhere or between 10 or 20 different people passing your information on from one form to another, passing, having to repeat yourself, doing all of that stuff. The more broken an industry is, the more ripe for AI disruption.
But isn't it broken because there are so many incumbents who are protecting their turf?
Yes, but it's like almost easier to just say, I'm going short the past and I'm just going to try this new thing. And I think that's what people are doing. So if you look, I think the percentage of consumers asking ChatGPT for financial advice has gone from 15% to 55%, because most of financial services fails the average American consumer. It takes forever to get your money out if you want out of a bank. It takes like an ACH takes 48 hours to process. To get a mortgage, it takes 60 days. To get an approval from your local bank takes 3 weeks. You just go to ChatGPT, and it's starting to do it for you.
Our numbers here are 0, so this has to be the last question, and I'm going to need like a 5 to 10 second answer. I expect on my phone in some point in the future to have a personal assistant who will book my flights for me, book my hotel reservations, work out my calendar, answer my emails. How far away are we from that?
This year. It'll also refinance your mortgage for you this year.
All right. Thank you very much.
Welcome Andrew Kahn of Partners for Growth, Ivan Pupirev of Archetype AI, and Jessica Tuchel of the Wall Street Journal.
There you go.
Thank you. So we are hitting some pretty complex topics today, so I want you each to kind of spend a moment to set the stage. Ivan, you run a company in the physical AI space. We talk a lot about software-based AI. Talk about what are we talking about with physical AI?
Thank you. So Archetype AI, we're building tools, platforms, and AI models to bring AI into the physical world, and which means dealing with the data, which is specific for physical world, which is different from online AI, and the problems we're trying to solve in the physical world, which are slightly different from what we're doing online. And the easy way to say it is like think about like Claude or ChatGPT, but for the physical world. That's kind of easiest way to explain it.
And tell me, why don't you talk a little bit about what your company does?
Yeah, so we're building, our core innovation is a foundation model specifically built for the data that is produced in the physical world by, mostly we're focusing on enterprises who manage large assets. So you think about turbines and businesses, buildings, and intersection on the street, big environment, big infrastructures. And the data they're producing is unlike online, which is mostly language. The enterprises working in the physical world producing mostly measurements, because in order to understand how, like, a complex piece of equipment works, like a turbine, taking picture or description is not enough. You need to collect hundreds and hundreds of measurements describing behavior of that particular assets, which is assets cost billions of dollars sometimes. And we're building models. We help customers to understand, analyze, and communicate with those physical assets. And it's pretty. If you think about it, 85% of the world economy is in physical industries. Talk about logistics, transportations, all that kind of big industries. And we're building a horizontal platform which can serve them all and help them to analyze and communicate with their data.
I thought you said it really succinctly when we were talking yesterday that physical AI is about measurement and
that's right.
Regular AI is about language.
Yes, exactly.
I thought that was well put. So Andrew, you've heard the pitch. You're in the private credit space. So tell me, would you lend to this company? Are you interested in investing? Talk about a little bit about
Yeah. So I'm from CEO of Partners for Growth, been around for about 20 years, and then predecessor firm another 15 before that. And we finance tech and emerging growth companies globally. About 2/3 of our loans are actually outside the U.S., about 1/3 in the U.S. But we finance companies like Ivan's all the time, which are, if you think about his challenges of raising capital, he's got two options, right? And mostly one, small business growing rapidly but still spending ahead of revenues, and looking for capital to grow. Your choice is to sell stock and go the venture capital route, or get some debt financing. And getting equity financing is very dilutive, and if you don't have, there's a lot of in the U.S. it's easier to get debt financing for a company that doesn't have a history of earnings and is spending ahead of revenues, but outside the U.S. it's very difficult, and so we help companies like yours get financing.
Interesting. I want to talk international in a bit, but let's just talk about the markets in the U.S. Andrew, just to stay with you for a minute. So obviously the credit market, private credit has been in the headlines a lot. This whole growth at all costs is kind of gone. So what does that mean for you? How are the structure of these deals changing, if at all?
I always think there's three things in the world you can lend against. You can lend against assets, cash flow, or the enterprise. And if you think about asset-based lending, receivables, inventory, planes, trains, automobiles, things like that, it's a pretty efficient market in the U.S. Banks do that, especially lenders do that. There's cash flow lenders, and that's where I think some of the private credit has gotten in a bit of trouble, where lenders have tried to put, especially large lenders, have tried to put money to work, have looked at cash flow lending where they can put out a lot of money. And then some of these businesses, especially with the headwinds of AI, where cash flow maybe gets reduced, are starting to figure out that they put too much leverage on the balance sheet. And so that's really where you're seeing the stress is kind of on the cash flow lending. And then there's enterprise lending, which is like kind of venture debt-y, where you're lending to companies where you're looking at their growth rate and their enterprise value and their intellectual property, you're kind of lending against that value. And that's kind of a separate market, which hasn't been terribly affected yet. But those are kind of the three elements I look at.
Ivan, how are you defining what a healthy growth trajectory looks like?
So I think so physically, our company falls sort of in this between two kind of buckets. One of like SaaS companies, which can grow very fast and very aggressively, and companies which is in hardware business, which can go slow. So we come in between these two extremes. For us, the biggest goal is deployment. And when we deploy AI with the physical world industries, initial deployment tend to be slow because it's large enterprises, it's very large companies, and selling into large enterprises takes time. However, once you are in those enterprises, you can grow very fast. So it's a kind of very much sort of logarithmic curve, like it's a reverse logarithmic curve. So it's initially slow, but can grow very fast in the future.
Can you give an example of like what that looks like a hypothetical example of how?
Well, so for example, we work with a company and they're making the oil and gas company, right? So you start with them, and they're looking for the AI solution to monitor their oil and gas equipment. It's hundreds and hundreds of different pieces of equipment, very complex, collect large amount of data. So also highly critical industry for them to control for downtime, for the increased productivity, reduce depreciations. These are assets they invested billions of dollars in, and what they want to do is to decrease depreciations and increase return on investment, right? So initially, you need to prove the value of AI for those customers. You're starting with initial tests on a small amount of equipment. You're building in. You have to go through a significant amount of work of the compliance and security and working inside of the company. However, once solution is proven, it's in their interest to deploy it as quickly as possible because this AI solution can produce real changes in their business. So once you're in and you're proven, it will grow fast.
And I would imagine then you're pretty sticky too. Like
yes,
for them to
exactly.
replace you would be.
That's right, exactly. Because once it takes a long time to get AI solutions inside of these big enterprises. However, once you're inside, just getting in, the company is investing a lot of efforts internally, both humans and monetary resources to get you inside of the company. And once you're in, you sort of see these dynamics where this company is becoming, people within the company becoming your champions. They fundamentally want you to succeed because you're already in. I think somebody from incumbents, there's incumbents, of course, sometimes within the companies you have to figure out how to work with. But somebody new coming in and trying to get to the same company, you have an unfair advantage. So here, I think being first matters, and first move advantage is really real. If you are the first and you can grab the big part of the market with physical AI solutions, replacing you becoming really hard.
Yeah. Andrew, just going back to the market today, I mean, you've seen other cycles this happen. How does this compare to past cycles?
I think it's inevitable. I mean, there's a lot of capital right now. If you're a venture capitalist and you're sitting with capital, where are you going to put it? You're going to look for AI opportunities, either pure play or companies that are employing it, that can have defensible, markets, recurring revenue. Sticky revenue is really important for people to employ money. So it's inevitable that there'll be a lot of capital coming in and is coming in, and at some point there'll be winners and losers. So it's no different, I think, than a lot of cycles we've been through.
Okay.
That I've been through.
And then, Ivan, I guess for you raised a Series A round not that long ago.
Yeah, we raised this.
What's the one thing you had to prove about the physical AI world that you feel like a software AI founder wouldn't have to deal with?
Well, you have to prove. The thing about AI, what makes it special with modern models, AI models, is their capability to generalize. So the fact that you have a model which can do problems, solve problems, and solve tasks for the customers, which the models hasn't been trained for. That's what ChatGPT is actually demonstrated for language, right? So you can ask questions which nobody asked model before, and model will be able to answer. you need to prove that same thing for the physical world data. So having collection of this physical world data to train your measurements, mostly as I mentioned before, that's where you don't, and this data set is very limited. So building the data sets, collecting this data set and training the models, that's something software company, regular software company don't have to do this because they have the whole internet they can vacuum the data from. There's also interesting kind of twist is that recently there was a conversation that we are running out of data for the LLMs. So there's no more data to use to train the models on, right? So the interesting thing here is that the physical world has an unlimited amount of data because it's constantly changing, everything in flow, the same object, the same machine which was today working this way, slowly changing over the time. So amount of data is fundamentally infinite. We don't have a problem with the data. It's how to capture it that's the biggest kind of question.
That's fascinating. I want to talk about international markets. Andrew, you have a significant presence abroad, as you said. Where are you seeing the most fearless innovation?
There are pockets all over the world where there's tremendous entrepreneurship and good support for founders, regulatory support, and a lot of equity capital. Not a lot of debt capital, which is why we like those markets where it's underserved. I would say our biggest markets right now, growth, are probably, Australia and Asia has always been a good market for us. Primarily Singapore and Indonesia is a very big market.
Is there something about those markets?
Well, we look for areas where we can, as a lender, we can get collateral, secure, enforce, perfect. And again, there's a lot of good equity support, so a lot of private equity, a lot of venture capital, but not a lot of debt. In those markets, banks are very conservative, much more so outside the U.S. The Middle East is also, Saudi is a very good market for us. We've been very active there. A lot of wealth, a lot of consumer wealth, a kind of a greenfield opportunity for new technologies, good regulatory support, stable. So some really interesting opportunities there.
How is the situation in the Middle East affecting the market there now? Are you seeing the effects yet?
I mean, I suspect if you're in tourism in Dubai, it's not great. But we have not seen stress in our portfolio in the region yet. Obviously, watching it carefully. I think everybody's sort of a wait and see right now. But things are, it's amazing how people are resilient and they kind of get back to day. And so we don't see that in Riyadh so much. Dubai's a little bit more on edge.
Interesting. Yvonne, when we talk about physical AI, how should we be thinking about it in terms of the whole conversation around onshoring and reshoring versus reshoring?
Right. I think with the recent events and geopolitical situations, there's a strong interest to bring manufacturing back to the U.S. Most of the countries, and we're working with a few international markets, there's a very strong focus on building sovereign AI solutions and having AI and data and solutions be inside of the country. We also see that even on the level of the companies. So when you talk with the companies which deal with the physical world, like whatever semiconductor manufacturing, oil and gas, the data they collect from their operations is a core IP, and it's like top secret. So really unlikely they're going to give this data to large hyperscalers like Google's and Amazon's and everything else. They, particularly for training AI models, which can give them to everybody. So there's a very strong focus on local kind of physical AI, which is specific for that particular company or that even particular location. So the way we're approaching, it opens completely different and exciting opportunities in AI, where in fact, we're creating sort of a standard solution, AI solution, including AI model and infrastructure and a platform, and then dealing them to the companies or to the country. And they can then augment that model with their own data, so it's becoming their foundational model. So we're very much supporting that approach of bringing sovereign solutions for the companies and for the countries. So it actually helps us.
Do you think, Andrew, that in 3 years, instead of talking about OpenAI and Claude, and we're going to be talking more about these physical AI companies. Do you think there's going to be a shift, or do you think they'll just both grow like next to each other?
I think we will have. Well, of course, I'm founder and running physical AI company.
Oh, sure.
Certainly, I have a biased view.
How big is the market, I guess, is my question, too.
Well, if you think about the size of physical market, 85% of the world economy, as I mentioned before, in the physical world industries. So the real impact of AI, which I think everybody will feel, is when AI solutions increase productivity for the physical world operations, where the margins in a lot of physical world companies, whether it's manufacturing or transportations, are not very high, and definitely not even close to the software companies. So bringing AI to those companies and allowing them to bring the same level of productivity increases we saw with digital or AI, online AI, if you can bring it to physical world, that dramatically changes conversations of profit and gross margins. We can totally move that by a big degree. So I do believe that a real impact of AI, and again, as I mentioned, the growth curve is slower, right? You need to get into the physical world first, and then it starts growing. But this curve is going to be dramatic. And companies and countries which deploy physical AI, they will really future-proof it themselves, making sure it happens.
And there's a lot of applications that are being attacked and need to be solved. We're financing a company that's an AI robotics company that deals with very mundane sort of operations of managing documents and in the back room and taking people still mailing stuff in and taking it out and so there's all sorts of opportunities in areas that you don't really think about.
Are you getting more pitches in this space?
Yeah, we are, and there's always a demand for money.
Yeah.
In our business,
right. Yes.
Like everybody likes our product.
Everyone likes money.
It's all about the supply and the risk reward, and so it's the supply waxes and wanes over different cycles. We're probably having a little bit of a pullback now because of private credit issues and cash flow lending and SaaS lending, but there's always opportunities.
What is the biggest unforced error you see founders make when they're going from like 10 million revenue to 100 million or $1 billion?
Yeah, there's an inflection point of sort of $1 million a month in revenue that I see historically, where when you start to get more than $1 million in revenue, it starts to become a different type of business. Harder to keep your growth rates, harder to keep your investors happy, and then a lot of times you're trying to manage your growth rate and your profitability. It's hard to do both. You have to kind of pick one. And if you manage to earnings, your growth rate goes down, harder to raise capital. So I see that there's a lot of trying to figure out, okay, how do we get to like 30, 40 from 15 or 20? It's not easy. And then to get to 100. And you just, these are things that are difficult.
Yeah. Ivan, looking back at your time, what has been the biggest mistake you've made?
Mistakes?
Mistake.
He doesn't make a mistake.
We don't make
mistakes.
I think it's early to say what's the biggest mistake that we made.
Or what advice would you provide?
I think starting working with customers as early as possible is very important for AI companies. I think if you look at AI companies, AI is such a fascinating technology, and a lot of founders coming in AI, most of the founders actually coming from engineering. And engineers like to build stuff, they will build forever. So I think starting talking to customers even before you have a product and start finding these specific solutions and problems to solve right away, and then focusing your company on those solutions and building toward the solution, and then expanding later. I think that's was a critical piece for us, for example.
Great. Well, that's a wrap. Thank you so much, guys. This has been great.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it.
welcome Maverick Carter of Fulwell Entertainment and Max Tanney of Semafor.
All right, fantastic. Mav, thank you so much for being here. We're really excited. Most people in this room, it's a pretty smart crowd. They know you, but I want to just read a few notable bits to kind of orient the conversation.
I hate this part.
I know, I'm sorry. I watched Shane Smith do this, to prepare for this interview, but you kind of have to do it, which is you're the co-CEO of Fulwell Entertainment. You founded Spring Hill. You're a longtime business partner of LeBron James. You were one of the people behind Nike's first ever lifetime endorsement deal for LeBron, which I believe at the time was the biggest endorsement deal ever. And you've made some very wise, smart investments in Beats and in Liverpool. Your career has really risen with LeBron's. It's mirrored LeBron's in some ways. You guys have kind of come up together. You've seen it since the beginning. As LeBron enters the next phase of his career, as he's thinking about what he's kind of going to do next, how will that change and shape what you both are doing? How will it be different in this kind of next phase?
Well, the world we live in today is so interesting and cool because it changes every second and every minute. So if you think about an athlete like LeBron or his caliber, not that long ago, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, it would be most thought about like sportscasting or broadcasting. But now because of the technology and what we have and access, where someone like him who's become a person who has a global fan base can tap into those fans, I think what we've already built at Fulwell is the ability to have creativity and production, a whole company that does that every single day. We produce the Grammys, we're producing the 28 Olympics, all the ceremonies for the 28 Olympics, we're making those. We make the Kardashians, so we have a team of people that can produce and create at a high caliber. So he is actually going to come to us with what his vision is. How does he want to keep creating content and telling stories that connect with his fans? And then how do we build a suite of shows around that? And then the beauty of it is today, distribution is everywhere. So someone like LeBron's caliber, who has a big draw, you can get distribution anywhere and really connect with people and build a show just us, without anybody else.
How do you kind of balance I'm already going off my scripted questions. How do you kind of balance the desire you're an on-camera personality in some of these shows, like The Shop. LeBron, obviously, also he has his podcast with Steve Nash, which is, really fantastic. Mind the Game. How do you kind of balance how much to put yourselves into these projects versus the stuff that you want to do with you guys not as the talent?
Well, contrary to what you or anyone may believe, I never wanted to do that. That's not what I wanted to do. I was kind of, with The Shop, honestly, it was an executive there who was buying the show at the time, was really compelled, whatever compelled him. He said, hey, I'll do this and make this show with you guys, but Matt, I want you on it in the chair. I didn't really want to do it. It was actually HBO at the time. Who am I to tell HBO what the hell to do? It was HBO. At the time, no, it's a little wonky now, but it was the greatest brand in all of television. So I never really wanted to do it, and then my company, and I did that, and people liked it. My company pushed me. I'd rather run the company. That's what my dream was to do. I think for LeBron, for him, he's much more of a person who obviously billions of people know around the world. But the through line through all of it, even when I was on The Shop and other things that I've done, is like being ourselves and being authentic and being who we are, discussing the things that we know about and being curious about the things we don't. And now we obviously have a company that is way outgrown he or I, and we make lots of things. So it's, for us to be in, we're in like a tiny little percent, we made 20 shows, 20 different things for Netflix alone this year and 15 for Amazon. So people think we're in a lot, but we're in a small amount of things that the company does.
So to kind of shift gears a little bit, it's a really interesting moment for professional basketball, which you've seen up close. The play of the game is better than ever. We have some of the most skilled players of all time. But there's a lot of questions around the business and the future of the league. Ratings are down. There's a lot of talk about tanking, about load management. Do you think that the NBA is in need of some change, some major change or reinvention, similar to what we've seen in Major League Baseball, which seems like it's been a success?
Yeah, I think, first off, I think the ratings were up this year, actually, in the NBA. But they put a lot of games that were mostly on cable onto NBC. So you expect to see some things go up. But I think any and every business, especially in today's day and age, has to change even faster than ever. And I think when you talk about technology, the distribution of technology, and then ultimately, if you're in the business that I am, which is the same one that the NBA is, which is really the attention business, you want people to pay attention and watch the things that you make the product. Your product is essentially a thing that people don't consume. They watch it, they consume it, they sit, and you have to get their attention. And once you get their attention, you have to hold it. So I think how that is done, how you get the people, the NBA doesn't have a distribution problem. I think as they think about how they get people's attention and keep it, is something they have to keep iterating on as they go forward, for sure. And like last night, there was the NBA play-in for the NBA playoffs, which had a lot of stakes because the losing team went away. And I think stakes is always a way to get and keep people's attention and get people talking. And it also not only gets people who watch, but also the players playing care at a different level because it's literally win or go home. So I think into the future, I think basketball is in fantastic shape. Globally, basketball is far and away the second biggest sport in the world. The only one bigger would be soccer, and the third one is far down. Basketball is second by a wide margin. Third is far away. So I think have a good place there. They have great distribution for the next 11 years. They made that new media deal. That's fantastic. But I think as they think about literally the product that we consume and getting people who are younger, much younger than me, to watch and get their attention and keep their attention, they're absolutely going to have to make some changes. I think it's to add stakes to more of the games.
That's interesting, right? The play-in kind of did that, but
the in-season tournament, they've tried it, but the business model actually needs some adjusting, is what I think, because if you don't adjust the business model, which is an inventory model, right? They have 30 teams playing 82 games, and they sell that inventory to media channels. It's hard to adjust it without adjusting the business.
Will adding teams actually make that? Will that actually lower the stakes a little bit?
I wouldn't say it lowers the stakes. It just adds more inventory. You go from 30 teams playing 82 games, which is whatever that math is, roughly 2,400, 2,500 games. Now you're going to add two more teams, so you had another 160 games. So it just, I wouldn't say it lowers the stakes. I would say it's par for the stakes. I would say it adds inventory, which makes it, you need more people to get more attention from more people once you add inventory.
Right. You mentioned the growth of global basketball, second biggest sport in the world. Last year, there was some viral thing about you on the boat with LeBron, Jokic's agent. You were kind of consulting in an informal way for Project B, which is this new international basketball league. Can you tell us anything about what that league is going to look like? The men's version, which should be, I believe, starts later this fall, and how that's going to be different from the NBA's expansion into Europe, the EuroLeague, all of the other kind of global basketball. How is that going to be different?
Again, I think basketball globally is in great shape and continues to grow. I think there are, there's by any measure, basketball is second globally, but one big one is how many domestic leagues there are around the world. China has a really big, robust league. Europe has a league in basically every country. And then they have the European League, the European Championship, essentially. Then, of course, there's the NBA, that is King Kong of all these leagues. But I think no one has created a truly global league that truly taps into basketball fans around the world with one product that fans care about. And the guys starting Project B, that's what they're after. They're trying to create a truly global league like F1, right? If you think about F1, NASCAR is fantastic, but F1 is truly global. They race all around the world, though most of the drivers are from Western countries because you kind of need money to be a great F1 driver. Basketball has the opposite, right? Anyone can be great at basketball because the barrier for entry into the sport is so low. But the guys at Project B are attempting to build a global basketball league that matters and has stakes. And I believe that should become true also. And I think it shouldn't just be Europe or America. There should be a global basketball business that has stakes. And that doesn't mean all the domestic leagues, including the NBA in Europe, are going to exist, and they should exist. But there's enough basketball fans and enough basketball players to go around and build multiple leagues around the world. And I think the way those guys at Project B are attempting to do it should exist, and it needs to exist. And I think, sure, the NBA is going to go into Europe. I think they already are, find challenges with that, just because Europe already has a very well-established basketball leagues. And, you go to Spain, or the best league is the Baltic League with Serbia and Slovenia. Those leagues are very well established, and the European League is very well established. So I think the NBA going in there, they're going to find some roadblocks, but that's their thing to figure out. But global basketball being figured out definitely needs to happen.
Two quick questions, because we're running out of time. Your company, Spring Hill, recently, somewhat recently, last 2 years, merged with Fullwell. You're the co-CEO. What does the combined company do that neither could do?
So both, the two big things we got is at Spring Hill, we had a pretty robust, we were way ahead of them on kind of the digital side of content business. How are you creating shows that live on YouTube that most importantly become IP, like The Shop? We have the show Mind the Game that we own. We have to, but when you own something, everybody's like, I want to own something, I want to own it, I want to own it. But then the burden is on you to monetize it also, right? And to take the risk of putting up capital to fund it and keep it going, and put capital in to grow it, which is a fantastic thing. What Fullwell had that we didn't have, and now our company has both, obviously, that's the beauty of a merger, through all the pain we went through of integration. They were the biggest and best in the world in live. Like we produced the Grammys. We're going to do all the ceremonies for the 28 Olympics in LA, the opening and closing ceremonies for both the Olympics, Paralympics. We did Harry Styles live in Manchester this year. That was just on Netflix. We did One Shot with Ed Sheeran. That was just on Netflix. So they were the best in the world at live. And the guy who leads that, Ben Winston, my partner, and Gabe Turner, but they were just the best in the world at that. And we didn't know live. And together, that is where the future of the content business is really, there's really upside in live entertainment, live experiences, and the digital side of the business. The scripted business, there's still a lot of growth and a lot to be done, but it's really like finding a needle in a haystack to find a hit scripted show. It's really hard to do.
Last question for you. I know that you're not going to tell me, you're not going to make news on stage, though I wish that you would, about what LeBron is going to do next season. Whether he's going to continue to play, whether he's going to retire. I'm from Southern California. I would prefer that he played for the Lakers, but we can set that aside. When you guys are having a glass of wine, having dinner, talking about what his future looks like, what's the advice that you give him? What do you suggest that he do?
It depends. It changes between glass 1 and glass 9.
Okay, what do you say on glass 9?
In glass 9, it's like incredible what you've done. Don't worry about what people think. Just continue to be you. Whenever you decide you've had enough, be done with it, and live your life and enjoy your family and more wine and your kids. And who gives a shit what happens? It's been an amazing ride. We've done amazing things. Continue, obviously, he loves his community. He gives back to his community a bunch, and can just really continue to do what fulfills you, what makes you feel good, because that's what the rest of the world is doing too. We all assume that people care about everything we do. No, everybody's too busy caring about themselves. So I try and tell them to make sure you focus on yourself.
Well, that feels like a great place to end it. Mav, thank you so much. It's been a great
Thank you, guys.
welcome Bill Anderson of Bayer, David Miliband of the International Rescue Committee, and Prashant Rao of Semafor.
David, Bill, thank you for the time. We'll do our best to follow up to Maverick Carter. I'm sure this will be as enlightening, maybe in different ways. Let's start with the big story that's affecting both your companies and organizations, the Iran war. Just in general terms, David, can you walk me through what's been the fallout in the last 6 weeks, financing?
Have you seen any news in the last 6 weeks?
Well, I haven't checked in the last 6 minutes. I don't know.
Look, the Iran war couldn't have come at a worse time. If you think about February the 27th, the day before the war started, there were 122 million refugees and displaced people, 245 million people in humanitarian need, 170 million people suffering from food crisis of one kind or another. So it couldn't have come at a worse time. And it has this triple effect. There's the direct effect on people in Iran and in Lebanon. I was in Lebanon 2 weeks ago, and 1 in 5 of the population have been displaced from their homes, and many of them think they're not going to be able to go back. So you've got the direct impact. The indirect impact is then everything that you've read about. 30% of fertilizer goes through the Straits of Hormuz. Who knew that? West Africa needs the fertilizer today, and it's not there, and that's priming a time bomb that is going to go off in June, a food security time bomb. The Council on Foreign Relations call the Iran war a slow-motion famine machine. So it's that serious. And just as a small micro example, the world's humanitarian hub for supplies is in Dubai. So all of the medical and other equipment that's there, including $130,000 of medical supplies to go to Sudan, the world's worst humanitarian crisis, is stuck. And then the third element is obviously the wider geopolitics. Just one example, obviously the Russians have done well out of the war. The geopolitics for Ukraine become much more difficult. So in those 3 ways, it couldn't have come at a worse time, and it's having very significant effects.
Can you see, if the war ended today, how quickly could you see IRC's ability to sort of respond to its various sort of operations, get back to what was February?
We have enormous flexibility. We're working harder than we were, but obviously at this time of high and rising humanitarian need, it's also a time of the most dramatic aid cuts that the world has ever seen, 50% cut in humanitarian aid over the last year. And just to put this in perspective, $40 billion has been taken away from the poorest people in the world, the people who are displaced in the world, the people who are hungry in the world, the people who need healthcare in the world and can't afford to pay for it. $40 billion has simply been taken away from their lives. So we're scaled. We're smaller than we were a year ago. We're $400 million smaller than we were ago, but we've got 12,000 people working their socks off around the world in the world's conflict zones. So it's not that we've stopped and can we rebound. It's when are we going to take seriously that what starts as a civil war in Sudan doesn't stay in Sudan, what starts as a war in Iran doesn't stay in Iran. How many more times do we need to learn the lesson?
Bill, obviously you have different challenges with regards to the Iran war, but I'm curious, how has this sort of fallout been for Bayer?
Yeah, we haven't been particularly strongly affected by the events in Iran. But I do think a lot of this illustrates the importance of, for example, food security. We weren't talking about food security before COVID. And since COVID, people have sort of woken up to this, that, a nation does not have security unless it has food security. And so what Bayer is doing around the world, we're the leading provider of seeds in the world, a leading provider of crop protection chemicals. We're trying to make sure that nations can actually feed themselves. So, for example, I was last year in Zambia commissioning a new seed production plant, and I got to meet some of the farmers who are using this hybrid seed that we take for granted, say in the West. These farmers were getting 7 to 10 times as much corn from their land that they were getting before. We're doing that in Zambia for South Africa. For Southern Africa. I was in India a few weeks ago, where we have better life farming centers, and these are places where smallholder farmers that are farming, a few acres, they can actually get advanced seeds. They can get prescriptions in terms of planting plans to increase their yields dramatically. We've trained 10,000 drone operators in India alone who can basically do the work of a man or woman in a field for a day, they can do in half an hour with a drone. And so these are the things that we're doing to try to help the nations of the world become food independent.
But from the perspective of, a CEO of a sort of massive company as well, I imagine the past 6 years have just been volatility after volatility, crisis after crisis after crisis. I mean, that must change how you have to operate a business.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we've put through it's been described as the most radical experiment in management in a large company this century. Okay, I arrived 3 years ago. We've taken out more than 2/3 of managers. We kept the individual contributors, but we took out about 2/3 of managers, and we basically put 95% of decision making at the bottom of the organization. When you do that, you get a massive increase in speed and in accountability of the people, the men and women around the world who are doing this work. And this is the ultimate in adaptability, is basically putting the power in the hands of people that are in front of customers, that are in the labs, that are in the hospitals, and that is our answer to adaptability and to crisis management. It's not the crisis management department. It's everybody in the company owning what's in front of them.
Let's just stay on sort of the developing kind of, not necessarily Iran, but the long-term fallout of sort of these various crises. I'm curious, one of the things that we want to sort of talk about in these conversations is the kind of growing role of AI and how it can make sort of these drug and sort of pharmaceutical and scientific discovery more efficient, but also the delivery of aid more efficient. I'm curious if you could take me through, starting at like sort of the discovery stage, how are you using it? And then, David, I'd love for you to talk about it, because I know IRC is doing some really cool stuff in terms of like deployment as well.
Yeah. So every new medicine is now being basically created in silico. We used to have these banks of chemicals, like thousands, tens of thousands of chemical entities, and we would screen them against targets. Now we're basically doing this with computational chemistry, computational biology, same for crop protection chemicals. We actually have next year launching the first new herbicide, fundamentally new herbicide in about 40 years. It was designed in silico. And so it's like the difference between shooting in the dark and having a precision-guided weapon. So this has tremendous promise for the world, and we're now going to start to see, just in a matter of the next few years, the new medicines that are coming are developed that way, as well as pesticides.
Like what kind of stuff do you think we'll start seeing?
Well, for example, there's a huge proportion of the interesting biologic targets in medicine, the biological targets, are so-called undruggable. They don't have an obvious place to connect a drug to them. And so it's sort of like, the medical scientists know that, this molecule seems to be important in cancer, but a molecule in the body, but we don't know how to drug it. Well, we have a subsidiary company called Vividian that's basically what they're doing. They have a proprietary method that is highly AI dependent for attaching a drug to a place on a biologic molecule that was formerly thought to be undruggable, that makes it druggable. And we have the first of these compounds now are in the clinic.
That's fascinating. David, I know you're doing.
So I'll give you one example and then one bigger idea. And the example is that the traditional way to just diagnose whether someone had Mpox in the Democratic Republic of Congo was to take a blood sample and send it off to Kinshasa, and then maybe you'd get a response after it run through the lab. We're today using AI to photograph a lesion on the body and diagnose with 98% confidence whether that person has Mpox. There are 200 other rare diseases in Africa that are often at the back end of the chain when it comes to diagnosis. This is an opportunity to vault them towards the front happens. So that's the example that's exciting. I think the bigger idea is to turn the idea of humanitarian aid from being something that happens after a disaster to something that happens before a disaster. The obvious case is the climate case. We can predict climate disasters with increasing accuracy, a week to 10 days in advance, in some cases longer in advance. We've already done the impact evaluation. If you give a farmer cash before the flood strikes, they'll make much more better use of the cash than if you give it to them after. We've done a randomized control trial in northern Nigeria to prove the common sense point. If we can do it for politics, though, that's significant as well. A lead indicator of conflict is when people start to move. So just using AI to be able to take a little bit of information and then have some kind of forecast of trouble coming, I think that's the sort of thing where we could shift towards a much more anticipatory mode for humanitarian action. It won't solve the politics, because humanitarian aid stops the dying, it takes politics to stop the killing, but it can help us get ahead of problems far more successfully than we are at the moment.
I'm glad you talked about the sort of migration as a leading indicator. I think something that I imagine IRC is having to see and deal with is this kind of new nationalism in the West, or it's like surging nationalism in the West that is very anti-migration. I'm curious how you're seeing that playing out, and you forecast the next sort of 4 or 5 years. Do you see that worsening, lessening, and how is that going to affect the crises you're having to deal with?
Well, I mean, the first thing is that there are different types of migration, and we distinguish between forced migration, so that's someone who's the baker in Damascus whose bakery is bombed in the Syrian civil war. They have no choice. The gang that chases someone out of El Salvador, the woman on the run with her kids, they have no choice. Then there's, if you like, voluntary migration. And clearly what's happened is that the systems for managing voluntary migration are not working well. And that means that the systems for dealing with forced migration are getting overwhelmed. You can see that in the US. The systems for managing migration across the southern border have broken down. That means the asylum claim process has just got massively overburdened. And so you've got this whole issue that people who are genuinely fleeing in fear of their lives are being lost in the system. Of course, that's a danger for us, but we have to keep perspective on this. 75% of the world's refugees, people who cross a border as a result of conflict or disaster, are in poor countries, not in rich countries. I mean, the refugees who fled the Syrian civil war in Lebanon, some of them who are now fleeing the Lebanese war with Israel, or the Hezbollah's war with Israel, are going back into Syria, which is now a low-income country. Countries like Uganda, South Sudan, one of the poorest countries in the world, is catering for far more refugees from Sudan than America or Europe. So it's important to keep that sense of perspective. Do I fear that the secular trends driving forced migration are pointing in the wrong direction? Yes. Do I fear that the politics of separating forced migration from voluntary migration are in a bad place? Yes. And so I don't know if I'd call it nationalism, but I think it's part of a failure to manage one part of the system that's leading to an abrogation of responsibility in another part of the system.
It's troubling, to say the least, obviously. I'm sort of moving. We haven't got a ton of time. There's sort of another couple of things that I wanted to hit on, but staying on the kind of migration point, it's a very different challenge, I imagine, in sort of the corporate world. I talked to a bunch of CEOs this week who have a lot of worry about sort of the pipeline of sort of high-end talent, because a lot of these countries, a lot of the countries you operate in, are just much more averse to people coming in. I mean, I live in London, and now if you're applying for a master's or PhD in London, you are not automatically allowed to bring your family with you. These kinds of things that seem like they're just harder. It's harder to move for work. I mean, obviously, David cataloged much more troubling sort of situation, but at the high end of that kind of thing, I'm curious how you see it playing out.
Yeah, I mean, multinational companies have to put the research jobs where the scientists are. And if the scientists are in England, you can put the research job in England. If the scientists in Germany, you can put them in Germany, in the US. And so I think, the free movement of people and skilled, especially skilled labor, that's a vital economic interest to each nation. And obviously, I think the politics around that maybe haven't been properly managed in the past, and that's led to this kind of pushback. But yeah, there's no borders for innovation. And so the innovation will go where the skilled people are.
But don't you think there's a massive opportunity for Europe? I mean, the crackdown on science, the assault on science, the cancelling of science contracts in America creates a massive opportunity for Europe to say to scientists, we're actually a home where basic science is not going to be interfered with. We're going to really try and capture some of that market.
I think that maybe hypothetically, America is still a very good place for innovation. Yeah. And unfortunately, in Europe, you still have a lot of obstacles to innovation.
I guess I was thinking more of the basic science. Yeah. I mean, you see the attack on the National Institute of
It's sometimes it's a little counterintuitive, but I'll give you an example. The European Union is contemplating gene editing for plants now. It looks like it's going to go through. Genetic modifications of plants went through in the US and most of the West, excluding Europe, 30 years ago. And that has led to better yields. It's led to lower use of pesticides and many other benefits, but the European Union is still blocking it. And that kind of hesitance to adopt science is definitely holding the EU back. In gene editing, just to make it concrete, and back to this topic of fertilizer and things, so we're working on gene-edited wheat and corn that can produce its own nitrogen fertilizer in the soil. And that's using gene editing techniques. I mean, think what it would be like if we had that available today, what that would mean for the world with the fertilizer shortage. But this is why we need to have a science-based approach to these things. It can't be based on emotions. It needs to be based on facts and science.
Do you feel like that's eroding, that science-based sort of, compared to, say, 10 years ago?
Yeah, clearly it is. Clearly it is. There's a lower trust in institutions, whether they're governmental institutions, academia, and I think some of that lack of trust has been earned. And I think we all have to, all the leaders in society have to figure out, hey, how do we do a better job on this? There were mistakes certainly made during the pandemic, things that were asserted to be following the science that weren't following the science. And now we see that with vaccine hesitancy, which, that's very unfortunate because I know for myself and my family, boy, we're big fans of vaccines, but that trust has been lost with a lot of people.
I've got one question for each of you, and we don't have a ton of time, but David, the aid picture you started out was just looking pretty bleak. Do you see any sort of countries that are stepping into the void, any sort of ways in which that $400 million gets addressed, not just for, and writ large in the sector? Is there, what is the case you make?
I mean, the much downgraded European Union has one virtue, or one of its virtues, is it has 7-year budgets. So there's no cut in the EU aid budget until 2028. They've published their budget for 2028 to 2035, and it includes an increase both in humanitarian aid and in what is basically competing with the Belt and Road Initiative. So you've got a European Union that wants to look to the world because it's a more connected world. Norway announced yesterday 1% of GNI is going into aid. Denmark refused to cut its aid budget. So there are some, not everyone's following in the rush to cut the aid budgets. I think it's also important to say that the countries in greatest need don't get most of the aid budget. The 20 countries in greatest humanitarian need, 90% of people in humanitarian need live in 20 countries, 26% of the aid budget goes to those 20 countries. And so there's an enormous reshuffle that's needed in order to focus the aid in the places that need it most. And the blended finance, the incentives of the private sector, you can do that in the middle-income countries. For the poorest communities in the world, the marginal aid dollar is absolutely essential, and it's the difference between life and death, really.
And Bill, focusing on Bayer, you've basically, the roundup sort of legal action seems to be coming to an end. It sounds like you guys are pretty confident. I think in a recent earnings call, it seemed like you're previewing that it's coming to a close, and American courts, I think, are finalizing it. I think there's some talk in the analyst community now that Bayer has to sort of justify being a unitary company, and there might be some talk of breaking it up. Is there anything you have Are you thinking about that? Is that something you consider?
We have a kind of a simple rule on this. We need to be the best home for each of our businesses. We're in agriculture, in medicines, and in consumer health. We need to be the best home for all three. In the past, I don't think we've proven that. We're working to prove it now with our new model. We're making great progress in restoring our pharma pipeline. We've got a big new advance, looks potentially for stroke prevention. That's coming. In crop science, we have a lot of big breakthroughs, 10 blockbusters in the next 10 years. So we're working hard to prove that we can be the leanest and fastest. If we don't do that, then I think we probably have to change the structure.
Okay, well, this is, thank you for the time, and thank you for both of you for all that insight. I appreciate it.
Thanks.
Welcome Senator Pete Ricketts and Ed Lawrence of Fox Business Network.
Please. Thank you. Thank you for coming, and thank you for the Semafor World Economy Summit on this. Nebraska Senator Pete Ricketts here with me, raised in Omaha. I love the steaks. The steaks are amazing. Didn't bring you a gift though. But I'm going to get to the Match Act. I'm going to get to the Match Act in a second, which you submitted, as well as the housing bill. But I want to start with some of the big news of the day. Next week, there'll be a hearing for Kevin Warsh, the possible next Federal Reserve chairman. His financial disclosures are in. Do you think he gets confirmed next week?
Well, we're going to have the hearing first. Then he has to go to committee, and then he has to come onto the floor. But I'm very confident that ultimately he will get confirmed to the Fed board.
Well, well, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, I think I've had a chance to, I don't know him real well, but I had a chance to sit down and talk with him a little bit. And I really appreciate, and obviously he's got a record as well, but he's got a lot of experience on this. And then I appreciate where he's coming from with regard to some of his policies, like taking the size of our balance sheet down.
What are you looking for then in the next Fed chairman?
Well, I want somebody who's going to be that leader, who's going to be consistent, and somebody who's going to help us maintain that fiscal stability. And I do think that, again, the size of our balance sheet is too big. So I think Kevin's got a vision for how we can start taking that down. And actually, if you're doing that appropriately, you also give room to be able to cut interest rates.
Are you concerned the Federal Reserve has become politicized then?
Well, if there's somebody who's not going to be really swayed by this, you just talked about his disclosure, I think it's going to be Kevin Warsh. He's got a very clear philosophical view that has been out there for a long time. So I think people are going to know what they're going to get from him because it's already been out there.
So the Treasury Secretary told me that Senator Tillis, there's a deal in order to get this hearing to happen, but there's no deal with the senator to actually confirm. And he's been holding this up, saying he wants to see the investigation into the Federal Reserve concluded. Would you vote for a confirmation with the DOJ investigation still ongoing?
Well, I would go ahead and move forward on Kevin Warsh because I think he is great and a great. Investigation's a separate matter. I think that's got to be done appropriately, but I want to make sure that we're not cutting out talent like Kevin Warsh on this because I think he's going to be really good for the board.
I want to talk about artificial intelligence. You're the banking committee. Last week, the Treasury Secretary and the Fed Chairman got together with all the CEOs from the major banks, and they warned them about concerns related to Anthropic's latest release of artificial intelligence. How vulnerable is our banking system, do you think, to artificial intelligence?
Well, if you look at how a lot of hacks happen, it's actually not the technology necessarily that gets in, though the banks are going to have to make sure that they're doing really a good job on the cybersecurity aspect of it and the technology aspect of it. But a lot of it is social engineering, and that's one of the areas that I think AI is actually, we have to really be afraid of is, maybe afraid of me a little strong, but we have to be thoughtful about that AI is an area where people who are going to use social networking to fool humans into making mistakes could happen. For example, AI can copy the sound of, this is not a new scam, but could copy the sound of your grandson's voice, call the grandmother, grandfather, and say, hey, I'm in trouble, can you send me money? That scam's been around for a while, but that's just a kind of a basic example of how these machines will be able to be used to fool people into making bad decisions.
Do you worry, take the consumer out of it, do you worry that artificial intelligence will be able to hack our actual banking system, though?
Well, if you think about artificial intelligence being able to be used to do hacking, it can also be used for anti-hacking. So I think that if you look at as technology has been developed, there's always been people who are willing to use it for malicious purposes, but we've also been able to find counter technologies for those.
Should Congress be involved or have a law relating guidelines for artificial intelligence and guardrails?
Yeah, absolutely. There is no doubt that we ought to be getting involved as Congress to create guardrails around AI so that we can, we want to make sure we continue to have robust innovation in AI, but we also want to make sure we're putting the safeguards around it so that we're not putting ourselves at undue risk.
How fast do you think that needs to happen?
In the U.S. Senate, that will happen very slowly. Yeah. That's just the way we work in the Senate, right? It takes us 2 weeks to process any bill at a minimum.
Right.
So that's unless you get everybody to agree to move it faster, and that means everybody 100 senators, and sometimes it's tough to get 100 senators on board with one thing. So I think it's going to take us a little while to be able to get around that. But we do need to start working on what are those guardrails we want to start, and also not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Let's start with small. Let's start with something we can get done, and then we can work on building upon that as we get more experience.
I want to switch gears to housing. Let's talk about the ROAD Act. Folks are concerned about affordable housing, how to get that housing. The vote was 89-10 in the Senate, a bill written by Elizabeth Warren. So one component of it is that it bars large investors from buying big swaths of home. What are the chances that this bill gets through the House, survives in the Senate form, and the president signs it?
Well, that's a great question about where this goes from here because, as you point out, the Road to 21st Century Housing bill that we passed in the Senate is about 86% of what the House passed, so it's very similar, but it's not 100% similar. So where we go from here is still up in the air. A normal process might involve doing a conference report on both and getting it worked out and then sending it back to the House and the Senate. That could be one alternative. Another alternative could be that the House passes our bill and then we address some of the issues the House has in a different bill. So that could be another solution. So we're still working on what ultimately that's going to be able to get those two bills resolved and get them to the president's desk. I think that there's some feedback we've gotten on some of the things like the institutional investors that we could pick up in a further iteration. And this is where, again, I believe let's not let the perfect become the enemy of the good here. Let's get something done. If we have to make adjustments to it, we can work on trying to figure out maybe another bill that would come along later this year to kind of fix those things.
But what do you say to the criticism that this bill caps landlords under 350 homes, that big investors will just be replaced by a bunch of smaller investors?
Well, again, I think that's where we can have some experience with it. I mean, people can make all sorts of hypotheses about what may happen, but if we actually get real-world experience, we've got data, then we can make adjustments that can improve the bill.
Now, you filed the Match Act. What does that do, and why do you think it's important?
Well, the greatest existential threat the United States has is communist China. And we are in a race, you talked about AI, we are in a race for AI and just in general to have a technology lead. Xi Jinping has been very clear he wants to supplant us as the world power, and one of the things he wants to supplant us in is technology. What the Match Act does is it would put controls on the types of semiconductor manufacturing machines that get sold to China. So, for example, Dutch companies like ASML would not be able to sell the really not only high-end EUV machines, but even some of their DUV machines to Communist China, because we don't want to arm our adversary here, right? We have a lead right now. We want to keep that lead. It's a very bad world if Communist China gets that lead. So all the things that we can do to slow them down is going to be good for us. So we want to slow them down in getting that technology so they can't make their own semiconductors that are as good as ours.
But technology evolves so quickly. Why do you think this bill will adapt enough in order to keep up with that?
Well, it will certainly give the Commerce Department some new tools to be able to use and be able to talk with our allies like the Dutch or the Chinese or the Japanese about. And doesn't mean it won't have to be updated down the road in the future, but I can tell you right now, if we were to pass this today, it would be a big help to be able to slow Communist China down. They are investing hundreds of billions of dollars in trying to catch up in the semiconductor industry. They don't want to be dependent on us at all. So to think that they're going to somehow continue to buy from us in the future is fantasy. As soon as they don't have to buy from us, they will stop, just like every other industry that we have. So the more that we can slow that down and keep our lead, the better it is for us.
This bill has some bipartisan support to it, some co-signers, doesn't it?
Yeah, so I introduced the bill with Andy Kim of New Jersey, and then we've also got Jim Risch, who's the chair of the Foreign Relations Committee, and then, of course, the Minority Leader Chuck Schumer is one of the co-sponsors.
So in it, you talk about choke point technology. What is that exactly?
Well, that's, again, these are the machines that actually make the semiconductors. Ultimately, what gets put into, whether you're talking about servers that do AI or even cars, it's going to be the semiconductors. What these machines do is help make those semiconductors. So we're trying to prevent the really high-end machines that can make the really great semiconductors from going to Communist China.
Would this constrict the Commerce Department in any way in terms of being able to export? Businesses, for example, NVIDIA wants to send chips to China. They've been pressuring the administration to do that.
Well, so first of all, this doesn't relate specifically to chips.
Right.
This is machines that make the chips. I've got a different bill on the chips, Safe Chips Act, separate bill entirely on limiting what kind of chips we sell. This is about the machines, and actually right now, like for example, Micron is an American company that's being handicapped because companies like that are Dutch companies, SML or Tokyo Electron, can still sell with much. There's loopholes. They're still selling into China, where Micron is being prevented from doing that. And so we want to put our American companies on the same level playing field as the Japanese or the Dutch.
I want to switch to banks a little bit, being on the banking committee. The level of reserves that a bank has been under discussion now, and it's been higher under the previous 4 or 5 years. And now there's some talk within the Federal Reserve that maybe the banks don't need as much reserves. Lowering the reserve would allow the banks to lend out more money, puts more money into the economy. What do you think about that in terms of the stability of a bank and lending, being able to lend?
Yeah, I do think there's an opportunity there to be able to be smarter about what we're doing with regard to regulating banks and what kind of reserves they do need and what kind of limits we're putting on them. So, for example, I'm really pleased to see the Fed is pushing back on what the Biden administration did, for example, with a Basel III endgame, and saying a lot of that stuff was too capital restrictive. We should be thinking smarter about using the advantages we have here in America. And in particular, when you're looking at mortgage servicing asset caps for smaller banks, that's where I'm really most concerned. In Nebraska, we have mostly community banks. We have a big regional bank, First National Bank of Omaha. That's who primarily serves our customers in Nebraska. And I want to make sure that they have the opportunity to be able to loan that money out, service those mortgages, and that sort of thing. We can do it in a smart way that allows them to be able to do that and still keep a safe banking system.
We talked about the Road Act, but reducing the reserves of a bank, being able to lend more, could that also help with the housing issue that we're having in terms of getting more money out there?
I think in the long run, it could help. The problem we have in housing right now and the housing affordability is the housing stock. We don't have enough of it. It was one of the solutions of the Biden administration is like, we'll just give people more money. Well, that doesn't necessarily build the housing stock. What we're doing through the 21st Century Road Act is actually trying to cut the red tape it takes into going to build a house. So, for example, right now, about 25% of the cost of a new house is regulation. And if you're building an apartment building, it's like 40%. And that additional red tape is what has caused, for example, the average homeowner today, the first-time home buyer, is 40 years old. 10 years ago, that person was 31 years old. So if we can cut some of this regulatory red tape to allow people to build more housing faster, that actually helps address housing affordability. Yes, in the long run, if we're able to make more home loans, that helps consumers be able to do it. But right now, what the Road to 21st Century Housing Act really focuses on is how do we build more houses?
Well, and that's the balance the president has said he wanted to make. He wants to make homes more affordable while keeping the value of the current homes. How do you balance that?
Well, I think, again, we've got high demand right now, and it's going to be a process. It's not going to happen overnight. So just like anything in the marketplace, it sometimes takes time. But our free enterprise markets, they work. So if we can, as the government, start ratcheting back on the red tape and allowing the market to take over, that's where I think you actually strike that balance in the marketplace that the president's looking for.
Is it solvable, the housing issue in the United States? Is it solvable within the next 5 years, 10 years?
Well, again, we got to put the good policies in place. Right. When I was governor of Nebraska, this is not a new problem. When I was governor of Nebraska, we created a rural workforce housing fund it was a different approach, but we were, again, trying to build more workforce housing. And it totally worked, right? What we did is we basically allowed communities to create revolving funds with state money that they could loan out at low interest rates, get paid back, and then loan out again. And what developers would do is that would attract them out of our bigger cities into smaller rural communities, and then they would build, one of the ways you get the economies of scale is by building, say, 12 houses at a time, not one. And that's where you can get those prices down for like $200,000, $220,000. And so that's the kind of thing that we actually had great success with in Nebraska.
In the last minute or so that we have left, I want to ask you about the gas and ethanol. What do you think about the ethanol standards now that have come in?
Well, everybody, you should all fill up on ethanol because right now, especially, gas prices are a little bit higher. Ethanol is really inexpensive compared to gasoline right now. Whenever I fill up with 10% blends of ethanol, I'm saving 45 cents a gallon, just so you know. So what I would like to see...
PSA is over now.
You asked, I didn't ask. So what we're pushing for, right now, E10 is kind of the standard. That's a 10% ethanol blend. We want to get the EPA to allow for, we need to pass legislation to allow for 15% blend all year round. Right now, we're limited because of law to only doing it during the winter months, but that's based on old science that's really out of date and was never very good to begin with. The EPA can give us emergency waivers, but that doesn't give certainty. And so what we're working on is a bill to be able to get that passed all year round.
In the last 15 seconds, would that push up the price of corn?
Well, corn prices are really low right now, so it would support the price of corn. Right now, corn farmers are not making money, and if long-term we don't have corn farmers making any money, they will not, that's not a long-term sustainable business model. So it will actually help support the prices of corn.
Senator Pete Ricketts, I appreciate it. Thank you. From Nebraska.
Great.
Very much.
Welcome Pedro Azagra of Iberdrola and Tim McDonnell of Semafor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being with us here this afternoon. So glad to be continuing the conversation about energy security and infrastructure with the CEO of one of the world's biggest renewable energy companies and renewables, but also across many different kinds of technologies. And sectors. Pedro, we're in the middle of this energy crisis stemming from the Strait of Hormuz. Can you say a little bit about how the crisis, you've been at the company for many, almost 30 years, I think we were saying, right? We've seen other crises come and go in the past. How is this one different? How are you changing your priorities in response to the current crisis that we're in?
Okay. First of all, thank you to Semafor, and on behalf of Iberdrola, my chairman Galan, and everybody. As always, a pleasure to be here helping.
Thank you.
I think the crisis that we have right now, we have seen many, and the important thing is it doesn't affect everybody the same. Okay, most of our business is regulated. We have networks in the UK, in the US, in Brazil, and in Spain. We also have a lot of contracted generation. So from that point of view, I think this type of crisis. For us, we are basically okay, so I think there is always some upside, some downside, but it's not something major for us. What I think is important is, it's not the same thing for countries like Italy, like, Germany. They are exposed, because they don't have, for example, nuclear generation, or they don't have PPAs. The marginal generation is basically most of the times being gas driven. If you see right now the prices, in Spain, in some other countries, and you see the forward pricing for next year, it's a little bit of increase, but it's not, like in the crisis, Ukraine crisis, etc., that it was 200%. It was not 300%. So it's, a few euros if you think about the price, right now, forward next year. So that's why for us, we are okay. I think, it's better not to have any crisis because you don't know the subsequent consequences. But we continue to make sure that everything is, we serve electricity and gas to our customers as we have been doing.
So it's almost like we have to rethink the role of international trade, energy trade, in a context like this. There's a sort of premium on domestic production, what you can control within your own borders, rather than the sort of free flow of commodities like it's been more the norm in the past. Maybe we have to reconsider that.
I think we hear many times about the U.S., okay? And we always say the U.S. is not just one market. There are places you have excess energy, there are places you don't have energy. I think in our case, we are in the Northeast. In the Northeast, there is no gas. Okay, we're working, with administration in the federal government, but also with the states, very well to try to see if there are ways of increasing the access to gas. And that's why you look at Europe. Some of the countries, they have exposure because the only access is to gas, but it's not local, it's not domestic. So from that point of view, you see some, statements done by Brussels recently that they say we need to focus on electrification. I think my chairman has been defending electrification for 25 years, and it's not only, from a generation point of view that it's important to have access to energy through electricity production, it's also networks. If you don't have the right networks, the energy doesn't flow. Right. So from that point of view, when you hear that, it's also important that you focus first on what you have access in your own country. Okay, some people may have gas, some people may have, renewables, some people may have, okay, I think if you can focus on that, that's the first step. Because then you stop the dependence on external sources.
What do you say to people in industry in Europe? There's this argument that ESG, sustainability policy, or Europe's energy transition has made Europe less competitive. Do you agree with that? What's the role of renewables and kind of European industrial competitiveness?
I think, the competitiveness, country by country, is the example I gave you. I mean, if you hear, the case of Germany, I'm sure the industry in Germany says what you were saying about the lack of, potential competition. But I think, you need to analyze what has happened. And what has happened many times, lack of nuclear, nuclear being shut down or nuclear never being built, it's not easy to catch up today. It's a decision 30, 40 years ago. So from that point of view, it's not easy to say a generic, lack of competition. I think it's clear, China is clearly, bringing competition everywhere, and we just need to react.
Mm-hmm. Can you say a little bit more about the U.S.? And so you built this offshore wind project, Vineyard Wind, which is up and running now. One of the few to survive. The Trump administration has pulled back permits for some of the other offshore wind projects that were under development. We saw recently Total Energies pulled back their plans to do offshore wind in the U.S. Do you think offshore wind in the U.S. for now has become uninvestable?
I think, the decision on energy policy is not decided by us. I think we're here to respect, how governments decide energy policy and just accommodate to them. I think in this case, you mentioned a project that was started, under the leadership of Governor Baker, a Republican. That's why we got there, to Massachusetts. And we need to respect, a government, thinks now the direction has to be X or Y. Let's just work on that direction.
Does it make it hard to make capital allocation decisions, though, when there's so much policy uncertainty or things are shifting?
Yes, but the need of energy is so huge in the U.S. in particular that I think the expression you have heard in the last 18 months about all of the above, in some parts of the U.S. is a must because you don't have any other access to energy. I think the important thing for me is, not to attack anything, which is already being built or something that, is already approved. Okay, for future generation, and this country needs so much generation, so much power everywhere, the governments decide, and we just need to accommodate.
You're planning to spend an additional 20 to 30 billion in investment in grid upgrades in the U.S. What are your most important priorities for future U.S. projects at the moment? What does that grid plan need to look like?
I think many times, you think about the U.S. and you think about the federal government. I think in our case, we run utilities in New York, in Connecticut, in Massachusetts, and in Maine. And when you think about that, that means our regulator is local. You think about Albany, Hartford, Augusta, that's where we have to work with the regulators. I think when you think about upstate New York, many people may think, that's New York. Well, upstate New York, the average life of many of the assets in our networks is 60 to 80 years old. So the need of infrastructure is not just AI, it's not just data centers, it's to upgrade those systems, it's to make sure they are, basically as they should be according to the, modern standards. That's why the leadership in New York is doing a great job, catching up of decades of lack of investment. It's not easy, because you cannot catch up in 2 seconds. I think the same thing in Maine, the same thing in Massachusetts, and that's why we're there, and I think, we are very comfortable because that's the place to be. They need infrastructure upgrade. By the way, you speak a lot about, lack of energy, lack of generation. What about networks? Mm-hmm. Without the networks, you're not able to connect.
What's the biggest bottleneck, though, for that type of build-out? Is it access to capital? Do you have supply chain constraints? There's obviously regulatory permitting issues. What do you see as the major obstacles ahead?
In our experience in many jurisdictions, in Brazil, in the UK, in Spain, or in the US, but let's put examples in the US. I think permitting, it takes years to get permitting. When you think about generation project, it's 5 to 7 years. When you think about transmission lines, it can be 10 years. Mm-hmm. But then the second angle is not just permitting, which is state and federal. And I think both parties are working, very well to try to get it, to the finish line, to make it easier. And that's why, even if there are noises, it's on the right track, and it will happen. How long it takes that agreement to happen, but it needs to happen, and it will happen. But at the same time, you have litigation. This country is about litigation. Mm-hmm. So whenever you try to do something, you have referendums, going to court, 25 different litigations. So when you are in our business, you need to be ready for that.
Because you have such a global footprint and working in so many different markets around the world, are there any lessons from other markets that you work in that you think could be applied to the U.S. to clear some of those permitting bottlenecks? But what should we be doing differently as the U.S. that maybe we could learn from other countries?
I think every country has issues, and I don't think there are so many lessons one country for another one. But sometimes I think regulation, we have a regulation in the UK, and we have, several countries or states, within the US having dialogues and copy things. That happens quite often. I think from an energy point of view, you see right now Europe, you see right now the US, there are issues everywhere. Mm-hmm. But I think the US, I insist, it's not just one country. You have different regions, and that's why for us, what is happening in Texas is totally unrelated to the needs that you may have in the Northeast.
Can you say a little bit about how you view China's role in this ecosystem? And are they, when you look at Chinese OEMs, for example, for wind turbines or other things, do you view those companies as partners? Are they competitors? You're also obviously buying equipment from European and US OEMs. Where does China fit into this ecosystem for your company?
I think, again, I'm going to give an example of us. Many years ago, my chairman, took a decision, which is we need to be global, but very local. And local means also purchasing. I think right now in the U.S., and we spend billions, in the U.S. every year. 95% of our purchases are local, from local companies. I think that gives you the confidence that tariff, no tariffs, issues, with China, etc. Okay, I remember, President Biden, when he decided the All-American, those decisions he signed with the unions. Now clearly you have a similar approach, of All-American. Okay, that's okay. I think in our case, 95% is bought, locally, mm-hmm. and the 5% is because sometimes you cannot find it. So from that point of view, I think that decision a long time ago, we thought it was the right one. Also because we believe, we are a local company doing utility job. I think we need to bring economic development. So the more I think we buy locally, the more I think we can explain to people the actual expenditure is translated to see the assets being built.
Right. We were speaking a little bit backstage about the company's growth over time. This is a story of sort of acquisitions and expanding from a small Spanish utility into this global company. What's next on your radar for M&A, the acquisitions that you're thinking about? What should we be watching coming down the pipeline for you?
I think, as you know, when you never say anything about M&A, what you're going to do. But I think,
I have to try, yeah.
The important thing for me is we announced a strategic plan back in September. Is, in dollars, is around $75 billion for the period 25, to 28. That's a huge organic investment. Mm-hmm. I think the examples is New York, decades of investing 100, 200 million. We're investing $2 billion a year upgrading the networks. So when you have, $75 billion ahead of you for the next, 3 years, taking into account last year as well, seems to me we have enough.
Yeah, absolutely. Could you just say a little bit more about in the U.S.? We have this. We've been talking a lot about data centers and AI. What's the kind of conversations that you're having behind the scenes with hyperscalers, with tech companies? What are they asking you for? How could they change their approach to kind of bring more power for data centers online more quickly?
I think for us, most of the topics are usually not something for the future. We're already, giving electricity 1,200 megawatts in the US to data centers and AI customers. I think we're already building 800 more, so we'll reach 2,000 megawatts. So it's already, contracted, with them. So we are there to help. As I said, we are producing electricity in 25 states within the US already, and that's why we're serving, some of those customers from an AI data centers. But my concern right now in New York, in Connecticut, or in Massachusetts, or in Maine, is to keep the heating, the lights on, to make sure, economic development hopefully kicks in, but, right now there is no energy. Mm-hmm. Okay, there is no access to more gas. There is no, additional generation being built massively. So from that point of view, depending on the region, the needs are different.
Right, because we were speaking also backstage about this issue of retail power prices. People are concerned about inflation. What's the right way to, how do you sort of alleviate the fears that people have about more expensive power? How do we solve for that problem going forward?
I think the existing generation that we have, and we have, gas-fired generation, we have, solar generation, wind generation in the US. I think we have many PPA. We continue to sign PPAs, so, that generation. The first thing is because they like a price, perhaps inflation-linked, for the next 20 years, mm-hmm. the next 15 years. Okay, once you get, things like gas generation, the first thing is not just how much it costs to build the gas generation facility. Also, you need to upgrade the networks to link it to the gas pipeline. Mm-hmm. So that's why that's additional costs that need to be taken into account. Also, I think you have this contract for PPAs electricity for 15, 20 years. You don't have the same contract for gas. But that's why it's kicking off. I think the need of energy is there. And that's why all these type of generators are going to be needed.
That's going to be the problem also, I think, for data centers that are putting gas behind the meter for those power projects, the exposure to gas price volatility.
We saw that in cogeneration before, and that's why you're going to see many options. And in our case, we continue to serve all these people.
Pedro, thank you very much. We'll be watching that closely. So thank you. Great. Thank you.
Welcome Dr. Huyao Wang of the Center for China and Globalization and Andy Brown of Semafor.
Good, thank you. Dr. Wang, thank you for taking the time.
Thank you, Andy. Yes.
So we're 1 month out from a US-China summit in Beijing. When President Trump goes to Beijing, he's going to be the first US president to visit for a decade. He was the last president to visit during his first term. How do you assess US-China relations right now? And what are you hearing in Beijing about expectations for this summit and the outcome?
Yes, thank you, Andy, and thank Semafor for the invitation. I think this President Trump's visit to Beijing in about a month's time is so important, and also China-US relations is the most important relations, I would say, bilateral relation in the world. I think the expectation of President Trump's visit is quite high, actually, in China too. First, I think that he comes, in a big historical time after decades. And then amidst all those geopolitical tensions, Iran conflicts and the Russian war, whatever, so it's very important. But also bilaterally, we have so many things to talk about. I remember last time when President Xi and President Trump made a phone call, they said they are steered through a gigantic ship in a turbulent world. And then China and the US can work together to do better things, greater things. So I would think that this visit, we will see they're going to probably stabilize the relations. Stability is probably the most important buzzword, I think, for both China and US. We need the stability. The world in the stability just by just merely shaking hands. We send 1,000 images around the world. So that is really great. But of course, practically, we can still reach a lot of things. We can probably see how we can stabilize the trade frictions. We can see how we can
balance the trade and also improve the global collaboration, but also particularly for the peace making that China is really working on right now.
Somebody said that President Trump is the least hawkish member of his own administration when it comes to China. And that from Beijing's perspective, there's never going to be a better chance to do a deal, whether that's on tech, trade, Taiwan. Does that ring true to you?
I think that's probably correct. President Trump, in that sense, is very practical. I mean, he was trying to invite President Xi to his inaugural speech. He wants to be the president of peace and unity. And I think that if he wants to be the peace and the unity, he needs China to collaborate. And so we do have a lot of bilateral issues. But I think in a global situation like this, in a multipolar world where U.S. and China, if they actually stay together, that will generate a huge benefit, not only for U.S. and China, but for the world. So I think we do have differences. Of course, we have a competition. We have a lot of different value and system. But after all, we are all the villagers of the global village. We have to really work together.
So we had Scott Bessent at dinner on Tuesday. Mm-hmm. And he said that one of the outcomes of the summit would be the establishment of a board of trade and a board of investment. Have you heard about this? How is it going to work? Also a white list, potentially a white list of Chinese companies that can be waved straight through into the United States.
Absolutely. That's a brilliant idea. I think that given that the importance of China and the U.S. in terms of trade and investment, particularly China investment, this green investment, this global investment, there's outbound, inbound investment flows. I think it's high time now U.S. and China works together. I remember President Trump during his campaign speech said, if BYD set up a factory in Mexico, he's going to levy 200%, but if it's in the U.S., he's open to that.
Do you think that's going to happen?
Well, I think probably we need still a little bit of consensus building on that. But in the long run, I do see a benefit of massive Chinese investment to the U.S. That's what Japanese did in the 90s and 80s. And if we want to address this imbalance issue, one of the best ways really to attract more Chinese investment, manufacturing, that can help U.S. capability.
Well, Trump has said that he's open to the idea of having Chinese car companies. Today, Jim Farley, who's CEO of Ford, said the U.S. government should keep them out. How do you think it's going to play out?
No, I do think there's maybe a variety of opinions here at Washington, but I do think President Trump has a vision. He has a grand vision. He knows that two largest economies can't really at odds all the time. You need to find a way to really work together. And that's why he's so interested to come to China, and he's invited President Xi to come again to return the visit. And then there's another two summits we're going to see this year. So there's a lot of a round of high summit that we're going to expect.
Okay, how about the tough questions, Taiwan? A lot of speculation that China is going to try to get President Trump to say that the U.S. opposes Taiwan independence rather than it doesn't support it.
I think that's probably, U.S. could think about it because, after all, Taiwan is part of China. The old government recognizes Taiwan is a province of China. That has been written in 184 countries when they set up diplomatic ties. And U.S. recognized Taiwan as part of China. If it's part of China and U.S. previous administration all oppose Taiwan, to not to get independent, whatever. They can probably say that. I would think if President Trump can say they support the peaceful unification, that would be hugely popular, I think, as well. Given that recent KMT chairwoman, Madame Zheng, visited Beijing, and there's a huge, normalizing relations between the parties of KMT and the CPP. So I would think this would be a great idea to do that.
Okay, since we're on the topic of Taiwan, a lot of concern among businesses represented here at this event about choke points. Strait of Hormuz, you have Panama, you have Malacca Strait, Suez Canal, but the biggest one, the most important one, is Taiwan. Mm-hmm. Every year for the last 3-4 years, the People's Liberation Army have been practicing for a blockade of Taiwan or an invasion. Should they be worried that China will pull the trigger on this?
No, I think that currently the situation is slowing down and normalized a bit. But of course, China always maintained that deterrence. If the separatist movement in Taiwan really got out of control or Taiwan really get independent, I mean, China reserves the right to unify its own country, one of its provinces. I think the opinion polls and also the KMT they are pro-reunion, and they are the majority of the parliament in Taiwan. I would think, if they keep continuing this kind of a peaceful momentum, for example, China welcome all the Taiwanese coming to the mainland free of work and all the health, schooling, everything. And then also they opened all the entry of points to Taiwanese. Just you can get the permit right on the spot of the entry.
Is there a date? Some people think 2027. That's when the PLA are going to try to take Taiwan. So other people say 2028.
Yeah. No, that's a purely speculation. I don't think you can find any official document. Chinese were saying that 2027. I think now with this historical visit, which happened in a decade time, that myth has been debunked. Basically it doesn't exist. I think China wants peaceful unification. President Xi and Madame Zheng all stressed the peaceful unification. And also the Taiwanese actually went to mainland last year, has doubled from 2 million previously to 4 million trips made. And there's 1 million, 2 million Taiwanese working in the mainland. There's 500,000 marriage across the street. The integration is so deep now, I don't think they're going to have a war on that if they really can work out the differences by themselves.
Okay, let's talk about Iran. Last week, President Xi Jinping said, the global order is crumbling into disarray. He didn't actually mention the United States. What did he mean by that?
No, I think, that's probably we're seeing this year. There's a lot of unexpected things happen. We see what happened with Venezuela in Latin America. We suddenly, out of blue, saying this what happened in Iran because U.S. said last June they already obligated, already destroyed all the nuclear facilities. Certainly, what's the imminent threat for U.S. to get in that? So we don't want to see the law of a jungle or might is right? We need to really have some kind of procedures or either Congress or UN Security Council to do anything like that at kind of scale. But China this time is so different. And Foreign Minister Wang Yi has actually phoned the 26 counterparts, including Israel and Iranians, and also all the Security Council members and all the other major European foreign ministers and things like that. And also, of course, Pakistan foreign minister was invited to Beijing, and they reached the 5-point of a peace proposal for Iranian conflict. And then we are seeing that Islamabad is become a mediator. Yeah. And now J.D. Vance, Vice President, is going there again. So we see that China probably is fully support and really making all its efforts to make this happen.
Very risky now. The U.S. Navy is blockading the Strait of Hormuz. There are Chinese flagged vessels sailing in and out. Yeah. What would happen if the U.S. Navy interdicted a Chinese vessel?
I think this is temporary. I don't think that is a choking point that can last for the war. I mean, first of all, it's no good for the Gulf country. All its allies of U.S. It's no good for Iran, for China, and rest of the world. So if U.S. is not benefiting from them, if the world economy clumps, and also we see that there's a lot of U.S. dollar-backed transaction is delayed or impacted. So I think in the long run, we need to open the Hormuz because certainly China depends on quite a bit of that too. But China is also diversifying. China green power is already, renewable power is already half of its capacity. And China can also buy more other countries too. So it's not really the end of the world for China. But I think it's, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN, many other countries depend on that. And US and Europe. So we need to really stabilize the world by opening the Hormuz channel.
So we saw a U.S. Marine Expeditionary Force pulled out of Okinawa, the U.S. 7th Fleet redeploying to the Gulf. This is leaving a vacuum in Asia. Does China aspire to fill that vacuum?
Well, I mean, historically, I think for the last 45 years, China never invaded any other countries, never sent any soldier anywhere, never built up a military base.
Vietnam.
Yeah, Vietnam is in 1979. That was already 45 years ago. So I don't think that, China has that kind of expression. Confucius culture is that you cultivate your land. Four crops a year, you have to stay in your land. That kind of a Confucius culture, your parents are alive, you don't travel so far away.
So much pressure on Taiwan, so much sanctions on Japan, strategic pressure on South Korea, on the Philippines, all of the United States friends in Asia. What's the strategy here? What is Beijing attempting to achieve?
No, I think China is actually trying to normalize relations with better relations. The surrounding countries have become focused now. Vietnamese new chairman is just in Beijing right now, and also we are working with all the other countries. President Xi last year made only trips to the neighboring countries, ASEAN, Central Asia, also South Korea. So we work with all the neighboring countries to improve a better relation. Like US did for Western Hemisphere, we want to make a good relation for
Dr. Wang, we could go on all day.
Sure.
We're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Andy. Thank you. Okay, good.
Welcome Christian Ulbrich of JLL and Andrew Edgecliffe Johnson of Semafor.
Semafor World Economy. So we last met in New York, I think 5 weeks ago. We were just 10 days, 2 weeks into the conflict in Iran. And you told me then you'd seen no impact. Your clients were carrying on much as before. What's the picture today?
Well, I think I also told you the longer it will take, the impact will rise.
You did.
And so it takes now much longer than probably anybody anticipated. I would still hope that if it comes to an end now, as the president said today, then the impact will be limited. But there is obviously impact because energy prices have moved up significantly. And then there's also a lot of damage which has been created, so not all the production will be back on relatively swiftly. So we will see elevated energy prices for quite some time, and that obviously feeds into inflation, and that feeds into interest rates.
And what's your experience? You've managed this business through a lot of different crises of different natures. What's the lag effect? How long does it normally take for clients to start responding to shocks to the system?
I think the first thing what I have learned from all those crises we have to manage over the last decade is that you have to, first of all, separate kind of the impact on the people who are immediately involved, and that's obviously a human tragedy there, and we have lots of employees in that region. The other thing is how it will impact the general economy and our clients, and then the final stage is how will it actually impact us? And so sometimes the more noise and uncertainty there's out there in the world, that is not necessarily bad for us as a company because that provides the need for advice and therefore is not, as I said, not necessarily immediately bad for us. Now here, I think investing into real estate and taking decisions, long-term decisions on signing large leases, people need to have visibility. And with these numerous crises we have to deal with, obviously this one is only one of many crises, there's still many others going on, that is just creating a lack of visibility. And so what you would do when you drive your car and it's foggy, you slow down because you can't see that well. And so that's a little bit what we see. People are just going on the brakes and they want to have a little bit more visibility before they take long-term decisions.
What kind of advice are they asking you for now? What sort of things they need your help with in these circumstances?
I would say on this one, nobody will ask us when will that war end or anything like that. So that's not the point. I think at the moment, the biggest uncertainty is actually coming more from the AI side than from that war, because when you have to make a long-term commitment on space and you don't know actually how much space you will need, that is also a big aspect for our clients. Yeah.
So I want to come around to AI. You've got to make your own decisions about where you're going to invest. The Gulf has been a growth area for you in recent years. Has your expectation of future growth in that region fundamentally changed?
I wouldn't say fundamentally. The region has obviously different elements. We have been, as most companies, for a very long time in the Emirates, and then we started to come to Saudi back in 2006. And what you have seen, the development in Saudi is pretty remarkable, and we have now a bigger presence in Saudi than we have in the Emirates. And for what it's worth, I would see that Saudi is a relative winner of that situation. And we are staying fully committed. I believe that clients will stay fully committed of it. In fact, we were negotiating a large joint venture with the National Fund in Saudi Arabia. And that started 2 years ago, and it literally closed this week. And so there was a question coming up, are you still feeling comfortable? And I have to say, I still feel very comfortable because I'm sure that Saudi will kind of come out of that and will continue to strive.
Do you think in the next year or two is going to be a slower period in that region?
I'm not sure that will be the case for Saudi, again, because they have the benefit that they have also the port on the Red Sea side. Yeah. So they have both sides, and they have reinstalled the pipeline to this old capacity before it was hit. And so I think they will be fine. I'm slightly more concerned about all the other smaller nations, obviously. Right. Kuwait, Bahrain, and Qatar. And then also the Emirates. That's a tough one they have to deal with because they had different areas they were benefiting from, not least the massive global tourism, but also as a hub for their brilliant airlines. And I think that will take a while until this is fully recovering.
So you're leading this global organization. You're based in Frankfurt. Do you see a sentiment difference in Europe versus the US?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, when we were talking in New York, I was thereafter then going to Boston and then to San Francisco. And in San Francisco, nobody was talking about that war. Literally nobody. In New York, a little bit, and in Boston, a little bit. Whereas it was in Europe every day the opening of the news. And it was the first 2, 3, 5 minutes of the evening news was all about that war in Iran and then about the war in the Ukraine. Now that has changed as the war has moved on. Now I think there is a little bit more talk here as well, certainly here in Washington. But it is in comparison far less of an issue than it is for the people in Europe.
And how big a sentiment sort of hit do you think we've seen in Europe so far?
Well, I mean, I think it's another piece of where Europeans have struggled to understand. There was this old friendship between the US and their allies in Europe. And, you could have expected if something like this is coming up that a bit of prior communication would have helped to ease the understanding. But that hasn't happened. So
shifting gears, you've led this company through COVID, the Ukraine war, inflation, now war in the Middle East. What have you figured out is the key to building any kind of resilience into the business? JLL's been around since the mid-19th century. I know you think about how you make it last for another 100 and something years. What's the trick to keeping it resilient?
Well, first of all, JLL was founded in 1783, so it's...
I'm sorry.
The company is older than I look. Yeah, right. And so, listen, the amount of challenges which we had to face, especially over the last 10 years, have been massive. And I think it's a series of things which you have to kind of prepare for here. Number one, I would always say is you have to really have a brilliant team of people around you. The world has become so complex that not the smartest CEO in the world is able to run a global company on its own. You need a team of people around you so that you can divide the burden and also discuss and brainstorm what is right. Secondly, I think you need to have a certain culture within the organization. People need to have confidence in their leaders. They need to stay calm because there's so much going on. It doesn't help if people start to hyperventilate. We can't change the environment. We can only influence what we can influence. And so people need to stay calm. And that's important. And then I think there's also your overall business model has to be prepared for the amount of uncertainty. So it's a question how resilient your business model is, how much risk you are taking, and that leads you then very quickly also to the shape of your balance sheet. I mean, we have deliberately, literally paid down pretty much all the debt we ever had, and we run this company at almost zero debt levels, and we are very focused on our free cash flow. Because you never know what's happening tomorrow, and these overlapping crises which we have in the world, you rather like to have a really solid balance sheet.
And is that a long-term plan, or does it mean you've actually got some firepower if opportunities are shaken out?
Well, that is a benefit of that strategy, that we have firepower if needed. But as long as the environment doesn't fundamentally change, and with all the optimism I would like to have, I don't expect that we are moving into a world which is as calm as it has been, especially when I was younger. I think it is prudent when you carry responsibility for far more than 100,000 direct employees and a couple of 100,000 contractors who only work for us, that you create a platform which makes sure that you can pay their salaries and what they have earned consistently.
So when we last spoke, you identified this sort of K-shaped corporate economy. And the bigger companies are getting bigger. And you've very much aligned yourselves with those big companies, and you've figured out that if you can reduce complexity for a very large company, it's going to reward you by taking you with it as it grows. And their growth is your growth, I think, was your phrase. But what does that mean for the smaller companies in your business? Is there going to be a sort of shakeout here in your industry? And is that going to provide some opportunities for you for M&A?
Yeah, I would say this is not down to our industry only. On almost every industry, you have kind of the winners, and they have been growing much faster than the overall industry has been growing. And so it's usually the one in the middle which are mostly squeezed. The winners are winning, and then you have very smart little niche players who find their way around to have a business. But the ones in the middle, they struggle. They are just too small to be big, and way too big to be really small. They also need the same kind of technology what we need, but they have to pay that technology on a much lower revenue base. And they also need the same type of talent, but it's much harder for them to attract that talent because they may not have that superior brand. But again, I don't think that's unique to our industry. We see that pretty much everywhere. And it will be interesting to see whether AI will change that. But for now, I think, again, AI will favor those who have the ability to really embrace it and to invest accordingly.
You've been an early investor in data and in AI before it was the obvious thing to do. Do you think AI makes the business more resilient, or your deployment of AI?
Well, for now, it is at least a major tailwind for us on the client side. When you look at San Francisco market, the amount of leases we did on behalf of our clients in the last 6 months with AI companies is pretty amazing. The same is true in New York. So that's one point. But the other point is that obviously we are a people-intensive business with thousands and thousands of different processes around our services. And we are using AI now across the board. And what we have been observing now over the last 2 years in particular is that we can grow very significantly the top line without having to employ many more people to deliver that service. So that is clearly productivity gains, which we see.
Final question. How much of your future growth depends on every CEO needing a bigger building than their rival?
They don't necessarily need to have a bigger building in their vision. What is helpful if they believe that we can make them more successful than anybody of our competitors can, and that's what we are working day in and day out.
That's constant through the cycle. Thank you, Christian.
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
welcome Alexander Weinans of Deutsche Bank AG and Thorold Barker.
Hello, everybody. We are already down at 13 minutes, so we are going to go straight into our session. Alexander, I want to start. You run, as your chairman, rather, of Germany's biggest bank. Let's start with Germany. Germany long has relied on cheap Russian energy, US security, and this big Chinese export market as sort of core parts of its economy. Clearly, energy is in a very different place now. We know there are questions around the security side, and China has turned from an export market into a really quite fierce competitor. And growth has flatlined for 2 years. Is the model broken?
Well, the model is not broken. The model needs to be re-engineered very clearly. Dependence on cheap gas, cheap energy, was very helpful at a certain point in time. Now, Germany has actually been pretty quick in readjusting itself to importing LNG from America, from the Middle East also, from Norway quite significantly. So I think they've been able to reinvent themselves in terms of accepting a higher level of energy prices and probably a more realistic long-term level of energy prices. Now, China is more complicated because China was a large export market. And at the same time, the German manufacturers are very, very dependent for the supply chain on China. Also, again, here, we need to find in Germany a new way of conducting this business. What Germany has as a big asset, and it's rather unique in Europe, is that it has a wonderful manufacturing capability, engineering of products that are sold all over the world, including in China. And that is the fabric of the country, and that brings it the resilience. They have to make sure they adapt themselves to a new reality of competition, of labor, and with the government that has put in place a very significant fiscal stimulus, as you know, we talk about billion.
But is the culture there to do it? So I think the Chancellor said recently, and I'm going to read this, work-life balance in a 4-day week will not be enough to maintain our country's current level of prosperity. The head of the Norwegian Sovereign Fund said Americans simply work harder. You know, are Europeans lazy? Is that the challenge here?
I'm a European.
So am I.
I don't feel I'm lazy. But,
I wasn't.
But I do work more than the average European, for
generic.
sure.
So
yeah, it's a very fair point. In Europe, we have to work harder. We have to work longer hours. We have to be more productive. And we have to work longer years. It's very difficult to make these changes. And it's very difficult to understand that when you have an aging population, that to increase the age of retirement is such a difficult thing. Just look what happened in France. I mean, finally President Macron was able to get one of his reforms implemented, which was increasing the age of retirement by 2 years. Now, with the new political situation, they had to turn it back.
Yeah.
And this is what is a challenge in Europe, and that needs to change. But the question is, what is needed to get this change and to get everybody to accept that we have to work harder and we have to work longer? Now, what you see in Europe is you have Northern Europe, you have more Southern Europe, and in Northern Europe, people do work longer.
But okay, but if you look at, so 18 months ago, many of you in the audience will have seen or read, it's actually a very good report if you have time, the Draghi report about Europe and the challenges of Europe and what the opportunities are. There's been a lot of talk, but I would say not a huge amount of action on the back of it. I mean, can you, from your position, talk about, you know, if you were to grade out of 10 the actual action that's happened on this, what would you give Europe on this?
1 out of 10?
1 out of 10. Okay.
Well, I would say 1.
Yeah.
And the report is very comprehensive. It does address all the issues. And I think we all recognize it addresses the issues. We need to work harder. We need to reform. We need to simplify regulation. We need to change the tax laws. And we need to create also pools of investments that we can invest in certain industries in which Europe is strong on a European basis and not a country-by-country basis. One of the difficulties for Europe is that we still operate in country by country basis. So we have a European Union, but there's a lot of friction. And the friction is not tariffs, but the friction is complicated regulation. But it has the same impact as tariffs. We don't have a banking union, which means that it's very difficult for banks to have a European scale. Now, you can only be as large as your largest country. That's why Deutsche Bank is established in Germany, one of the largest European banks. But it would be very difficult within this situation of not having a banking union to see aggressive cross-border mergers. That is unlikely to happen at this stage. And for the energy sector, for the defense sector, and telecom sector, we have exactly the same thing. Just one example. In Europe, you got 37 telecom operators. For a market that is a little bit larger than the US, but not that much larger. How much do you have in the US, you know? 3, 4? And that explains it. And if you don't have the scale, you can't invest. We need to try to get the scale, and it also requires the European Union to change the rules about competition.
Okay, so let's give an example. UniCredit is trying to buy Commerzbank right now, one of your competitors in the German market, and UniCredit is an Italian bank. And politically, I think they've been trying now for 3 years, and it's politically somewhat stuck, I would say. As a rival of Commerzbank in Germany, do you think that deal should be allowed to happen? Because it's better for Europe, it's better for consolidation to occur for everybody.
So in general, if you look at the European market, the banking market, consolidation is required.
But in that specific
the question only is,
situation,
who is going to consolidate with who and in what form? That is the question. We have also nationalistic feelings about banks. Every country feels strongly that they have to own their own banks. And that needs to be overcome before you can see a really
But just on this example,
market.
I'm not suggesting they should necessarily be the people to buy it, but should somebody be allowed to buy it?
Well, in principle, we should allow any bank that is sound to be able to buy a bank in another country. That in principle. But I don't think that anybody is against that. It's also up to the two banks to find a way to go forward.
Although the politicians don't seem massively supportive of it.
Well, the politicians see that there will be a lot of layoffs, and that's what they find difficult to accept.
Right. But they also want that level of control. And I think what we talked about is, particularly before we came on, this sense that Europe is more focused on the level playing field between countries in Europe than it is competing with China or competing with the United States. So, you need to change this mindset to a much more global perspective.
It's a very fair point. The competition rules in Europe are there to protect the European consumer, rightfully so, but they do focus on internal competition much more than external competition. I'm a board director of Air France-KLM, one of the 3 largest European airlines. When COVID came, as you can imagine, the airlines were actually all given a form of government support by postponement of taxes or whatsoever. And what happens thereafter is that once you have received government support, then the European Commission comes in, and once it needs to punish you, you need to be punished. And the effect of punishing European companies means having non-European companies, particularly Middle Eastern airlines, come into Europe.
Advantage.
That was not what the intention was. But that is a side effect, and that needs to be addressed, absolutely. So and we have the same in different sectors.
So let's just talk about banking in general, given you are chairman of the bank. Just before the financial crisis, if you looked at the market cap of US and European banks, they basically punched head-to-head in terms of their scale. If you look at it today, Bank of America and JP Morgan are worth more than the top 10 European banks. Is that just now a structural reality? I mean, are they just going to be structurally more profitable and more powerful for the foreseeable future? Or is there any way that Europe can actually turn this around?
Look, as long as the size of the European banks is effectively limited by the size of the country in which they are headquartered, that is then a structural reality. So before you have...
But then why wasn't it the case before? That's always been the case, and yet... Was that because they had investment banks? Was that because they were more free to take risk? I mean, something shifted there.
Well, the thing that shifted is that the US banking system adjusted and reacted very quickly after the crisis 2008. And in Europe, it took 5 to 10 years. Even today, as you know, still certain banks in your country, in Europe, have state ownership, just as a remnant of the crisis of 2008. What is it? Nearly 15 years, more than 15 years ago. So I think the fact of reacting with much more speed, be more effective, be more drastic, taking bigger losses and moving forward is part of a cultural advantage that the US has over Europe. There's no doubt about that, and that played an important role. Now, the second thing is that after the crisis, which created in Europe a political issue and a big resentment of the population against banks, the regulators, because that's a consequence that you get, then were pretty tough, with the European banks, impose a lot of additional capital requirements, a lot of regulation, which meant that also the banks couldn't develop as quickly as they should have been developing. So it's a compounding factor that is leading us to this situation today, which I think is going to be going forward for quite some time.
So we've got time for 2 more questions. First one, will Europe ever have a top-tier investment bank again?
Well, Europe has one, Deutsche Bank.
You see it as a top tier?
I'm serious about that.
Okay. Even after scaling back as aggressively
Absolutely.
as...
So we scaled back in certain areas, but we developed at the same time. In other areas, in FIC business, we are absolutely at the level of the US banks. But not in all segments, but in certain areas.
In certain segments,
areas
that's absolutely right. So
absolutely.
You still have that ambition to remain at the top table?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And second, just as a final thought, if you look at Europe, we talked about the fact that there is still this opportunity in Europe, but there are all these challenges. If you could change 2 things, what are the most important things that would make the difference of being able to kind of leverage the opportunity in Europe that still clearly exists?
So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of opportunities in Europe. There's opportunities in terms of a lot of innovation, a lot of ideas. The big ideas are found in Europe, commercialized in the US. So Europe has a lot to offer. What Europe is very difficult, finds very difficult, is to commercialize it in a way and do that on scale. You have the scale, we don't have the scale in Europe because you go here country by country. And here I think that I only would want to change 1 thing, not even 2. We can change the way of governance in Europe. Europe was established with a governance that was focused on 7 countries, like-minded countries. Countries that would together decide how to deal with the future. Today we have 27 countries, but the governance has not changed. That means that quite a number of decisions require unanimity. Just imagine here in the US that any decision the executive wants to take requires unanimity of all 50 states. That's how you should put it in perspective. Now we need to change that. And it requires political will to get this change, and it's a very difficult thing to do so, because the smaller countries are feeling lost out, and the larger countries are becoming more powerful. But it is absolutely required, and that is the one thing that we need to do. What we're seeing in practice, and that gives me some hope that we can move around this, is the formation of coalition of the willings on a number of elements. So the larger countries get together and said, Capital Markets Union, very good example. We talked about it for I don't know how many years. I'm kind of tired of talking about it. But it can only be done if we have a coalition of the willing, of those countries say, we get it done, and the other ones you can join. If you don't want to join, you don't join. That is what we need to be doing.
So in a fast-changing world, you need faster, more kind of clear decision-making. Is it actually possible that this happens? I mean, those early signs, do you think they lead somewhere significant?
Well, we have a lot of challenges in Europe. We have a war at our doorsteps, the Russian aggression on Ukraine. Just also for you to realize what it means. The distance between Berlin and Ukraine is half the distance between Washington and Florida. That you can see how close it is to us. So this is a wake-up call. Now we have the energy crisis as a result of the war in Iran. So there's a lot of things that are happening at the same time that should really make it now clear for the leadership, but more important also for the people in Europe to understand we have to change the way we do certain things. And we cannot just continue on our welfare state, just continuing, somebody paying for it. But who is the someone? It's debt. We are increasing our debt because we're financing our welfare state by debt, and that is not sustainable.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
welcome Larry Coburn of NRG Energy, John Kerry of Galvanize, and Tim McDonnell of Semafor.
John and Larry, thank you so much for being with us this afternoon. Really happy to have both of you here. And we're going to have, I think, a very interesting and wide-ranging conversation between energy and climate tech and geopolitics. Obviously, Secretary Kerry being one of the architects of the JCPOA, been involved in Iranian diplomacy and politics for a very long time. Can you just say a little bit about how what your reaction was when this war started, and I'm also interested in for the energy dimension of this. When you were working with the Iranians, was the closure of the Strait of Hormuz something that was especially front of mind for you at that time, or did you ever think that could really happen?
Well, thank you. Thanks for the privilege of being here with everybody. Well, we knew, yes, that obviously it was one of the options available, and I was surprised to hear our president say, we didn't expect this or we weren't aware of it. It's quite surprising. Iran is very good at asymmetrical warfare. And people who have studied it or thought about it for a long time have known that. This notion that you're going to get together in Pakistan for a day and you're going to come together and blah, it's not how it works. I worked at it for 4.5 years, beginning with Oman and working with credentialing and gaining some credibility, and then ultimately being able to get into an outline, and finally getting the agreement. And I remember a very dramatic meeting the morning after we had come to agreement. We came to agreement at night, the night before, and then we met with all the ministers. I mean, countries were involved in this. This wasn't just the U.S. This was China, Russia, France, Germany, Britain, UN. And everybody agreed that this was the direction we needed to move in. So I remember saying to the group of assembled foreign ministers, who became good friends, we spent a lot of time together, and I said to them, speaking from my vantage point as a person who fought in a war that never should have taken place in Vietnam, and a person who then saw us make a huge mistake in Iraq, I want you all to know that what we're accomplishing here in Vienna, in my belief, will avoid a war. Because the options to having somebody build a nuclear weapon and not listen to the global community is confrontation. So it was clear that if you didn't believe in that or live by that, you're going to have a problem. And so we actually put together, and this is no exaggeration, I mean, this is in the writing, in the agreement, the strongest, single most enforceable, most transparent and accountable nuclear agreement on the planet. And we had moved from a 2-week breakout period to over a year breakout period, during which time it was our belief that if Iran wanted to cheat, we were going to know it, folks. Every intelligence entity, from the Israeli intelligence to the US CIA and DIA intelligence, to France, Germany, Britain, etc., all agreed that the deal was working. We had 130 additional inspectors on the ground in Tehran, daily going into the facilities, measuring uranium in, uranium out, yellow cake out, waste out. We had absolute television cameras in production. We made them destroy their plutonium reactor. We made them destroy thousands of centrifuges. Literally, the path was closed off to building a weapon unless they did it secretly. Now, I put on the table post Ronald Reagan, who said, trust but verify. We said, don't trust and verify. And that's what we built, something where we had a level of trust built up, but we also knew we could back it up by knowing exactly what they were doing. Now, Trump could have come in and said, I don't agree with this. I don't like the agreement you made. But since there's a year breakout time, I'm going to take time to renegotiate it. I'm going to say to the Iranians, if you don't do this, then I will pull out, blah, blah, blah. But no leverage for anything. Nothing changed. Nothing worked on, and we ultimately wind up with a unilateral pullout of the agreement, and everything that has followed is the result of that catastrophic political decision.
In spite of the decimation of the ranks of leadership in Tehran in the last 2 months and the destruction of the bombing there, is there a sense that now that Iran has seen what it can do with the Strait of Hormuz, that they're actually in a stronger position than they were before this war started?
Well, I don't think they're in a stronger position. They have cards to play, but I don't think they're necessarily in a stronger position. I will surprise you all by saying that it is possible that the administration's decision to blockade, specifically the ports and access to the coastline, et cetera, that could be a leverage point. And I try to call it as I see it. I'm not playing politics here. I think there's an ability there for them to sort of get back to the table. But what that does is it sort of makes clarity. President Trump and the rest of the world, we believe absolutely the future cannot have a Straits of Hormuz, which is subject to blackmail and subject to this big. You can't do that. And it's really interesting because the greatest changes in energy globally have come when there have been the biggest disruptions. If you look at 1973, that's when France decided to go whole hog on nuclear. You look at 1979, that's when Japan decided to, have a more structured and pliable energy grid. And then, of course, we've seen in the last year with Russia and everything that you really have to control your source of energy. That is now. This is the now. Right now, with the functionality closed, 20 million barrels, I guess it is, a day, and 20% of the oil and gas coming out. We've already seen an increase. What are we? We're at the high. I guess the Brent was somewhere around 110 or something like that. It's down a little bit now. But the fact is that there are two moments when you have the greatest change in what your energy posture is going to be. One is when the lights go out, and two is when the prices go up. And that's sort of the situation.
What do you see being what do you anticipate as the biggest change to come out of this particular crisis?
Well, I think
you're
going to see a lot of countries say we want to be energy independent. We have to be. What is the United States' strength here? We're energy independent. And what is the weakness of some of these others? They're not. And Russia falls into that in a very key way too, going forward. So, it's my belief that one of those moments of transformation is here now. And if you look at the expenditures, you can already see that. You see that writ large through the investments in better grid, the investments in renewables. I think we're up to $409 billion last year with respect to, not $409 billion, it's about $40 billion, I guess, but on nuclear and new energy, very specifically. We came out of Dubai, out of that COP, with 190 countries saying we have to transition away from fossil fuel. Well, obviously, we all know that there's been a little slowdown in that effort, but the imperative hasn't changed. The physics of what is happening to the planet have not changed.
Right.
So President Trump can change the law of politics and diplomacy just by unilateral action. He cannot change the laws of physics and mathematics, and they are very clear about where we're heading. I mean, go outside today. What are we, April? 90 degrees? Yeah. I don't know.
I want to bring Larry in, but just very last quick question about Iran. You said a moment ago that the blockade could be a leverage point for the U.S. It might work. If you were in the position of a diplomat at this point, what would your advice be to the U.S. at this exact moment? What should the next steps be?
Well, you have to have a negotiated agreement. I mean, you've got to do that. I found in my years of negotiating with the Iranians, they're as proud as any people on the planet. Huge level of pride, huge history, several thousand years. They invented algebra. They developed chess. I mean, you go through the history of their culture, the music, and so forth. It's a great civilization, which is why the president's words stung so much about wiping out civilization, which happens to also be a war crime. But I think it's important to note that you have to have an agreement, and that agreement is going to have an open respect for the international waters, for the passage.
No tolling.
Great support, no tolling, unless everybody agrees on it, unless there's some international agreement, we're all going to charge a toll. But no, not otherwise. But on the other hand, you also have to have a clear understanding about nuclear material and nuclear future. Now, I think there's a way to get there. Personally, I think if they're willing, there has to be a compromise here. Iran will not surrender. Bomb and bomb. I mean, if that lesson hasn't come over in the last 6 weeks, I don't know what does.
Yeah.
So, the IRGC can't surrender. Their power base will not tolerate that. And what you've seen is a transition at all the higher leadership with the younger leadership there, and they're more intense about continuing. Learn a lesson from that.
Yeah.
And if you learn that lesson, then you can find, I think, a sweet spot here, and I think we will. My prediction is that we will get to an agreement. I can't tell you when or how exactly. Yeah. And by the way, it ain't going to be too far off what we already did.
Right. Let's jump from Tehran to Texas, and a little bit of a pivot in the conversation, but
that's a big jump.
Yeah, a little bit of a jump.
No, the Texans will never surrender either.
They will never surrender.
Promise.
Amen.
Very true.
Larry, catch us up on, so right at the heart of the data center boom, you're dealing with incredible growth in Texas. I mean, can you say a bit about NRG's strategy for kind of capturing the upside of this demand supercycle that we're in?
Sure.
And how concerned should we be about this explosion of data centers?
Look, we could see this coming probably at least for the last 2 or 3 years, and we've been very consistent in saying that two things have to happen. One is we need to supply them. It's a national security imperative. It's an economic imperative. But two, it has to be resilient and affordable. And when this all started, people just said data centers are going to contract off the grid, and that works if you happen to be super long power and have plenty of extra. But I said it then, and I repeat it now, you're not going to take a gig of power off in a tight power market devoted to a data center and take it away from local businesses and local people, full stop. And you're not going to use market mechanisms to do that so that people end up paying 30, 40, and 50% more for their electricity. 2 years ago, we started working on a bring your own power strategy. So while everyone is now scrambling around for turbines, 2 years ago, we made reservations for almost 6 gigs of new turbines. Wow. The second thing we did was line up contractors. But the other thing that people forget is we haven't built a lot of power plants in the United States, and there aren't enough crews anymore in order to do that. The only way you can, and there are other things you can do with grids and interconnections, but if you don't bring your own power, if you don't think about affordability and not changing the supply and demand dynamic, well, then affordability is going to be a big issue politically. And who would want a data center that's going to drive up prices of power by 30%? No one would, no one should. It'd be political suicide to allow one. So to me, the second thing is if you think about it politically, would you rather socialize the costs of new generation and new grid upgrades across your voters, or would you rather socialize it across Amazon or Google's billions of customers around the world? Mm-hmm. That's, I think, a pretty easy political question. Right. I'll defer to my friend who spent a lot of time in politics, but I think that's a pretty easy one. And so we've been driving toward that, and we are now positioned in order to do that. We're already building 1.5 gigs of new gas power in Texas, and I look forward to doing more. And it will be in combination. It will have both gas and renewable elements because that's what the customer is going to demand.
What is Congress getting wrong about permitting reform at the moment? Their approach to it?
I don't think they're getting much wrong. I think, though, there's a big state issue, which is interconnection. We are badly underinvested on our grid across the country, because this wasn't a growth business for 20 years, and instead of doing kind of 2% a year to keep up, we did nothing. And now we're trying to do 20 years of grid work in a few years. So depending on permitting reform, that's again a state issue, and some states are slow, but Texas, that's not the biggest issue. It's getting connected. And it's become too easy to get in line. There are 200-something gigawatts in line in Texas. There's no way there's going to be more than 30 or 40 gigs of new power. But it's difficult for the regulators to separate the wheat from the chaff.
You think that much of that big of a share in the queue is probably bogus?
I do. I mean, if I talk about a new 40, the peak in Texas now is a little under 90. So that's almost a 50% increase over 5-6 years. That's enormous.
Right.
So 200?
200.
No,
yeah,
it's silly.
Yeah. Secretary Kerry, can you jump in on this issue too? What should we be doing differently on meeting the energy demand moment that we're in, and what's Galvanize's strategy at the moment for financing some of this?
Yeah, well, let me just say a word about Galvanize. I left being Secretary of State with the absolute I left being climate envoy too, even more convinced that no government's going to solve the problem of what is happening climate-wise. They can set a framework, they can provide incentives, maybe a subsidy in one place or another, but it's going to come from the private sector. The private sector has the trillions to invest, which are necessary here. The estimates are that in order to meet our obligations and sort of really reduce the crisis, which you're seeing play out, by the way, all around the world. I mean, insurance companies are pulling out of insuring in Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, California, Mississippi. Why? Because the premiums as they've been have not covered the damages, and the damages are going to come and continue to come in a very serious way. We had 101 degrees Fahrenheit off the coast of Florida last year in the summertime. 101 degrees, that is literally hot tub levels. That's in the ocean. But there are all kinds of things. I'm not going to spend the time here doing what we did for many years, which is talking about the science and talking about the impacts. What I'm going to tell you is this is what Galvanize is doing. We believe this marketplace, that the energy market of transition is the largest market the world has ever known, and that it is enormously lucrative. And what we're going to try and do is, and I agree 100% with Larry, what he said about the demand side and the supply and where we are in the supply today. We need as much energy as we can get, and it has to be firm, clean, but we really need a massive amount of energy. We have to talk about the abundance of energy, no sacrifice. We're not asking anybody not to be able to turn on their TV or not heat their home, blah, blah, blah. We're not. We're talking about if you invest in this, you're going to find new jobs and amazing returns. That's exactly what we're doing. In our public equities track at Galvanize last year, where we have some really smart people, some of whom came out of Goldman Sachs, some out of other houses, who really know what they're doing, we in our public equities track beat every single indicator. We beat our competition within the field. We were ahead of the various indexes. And year to year, year on year, we wound up at 47% plus.
That's
in
all?
our track. And we're on track this year already to sort of repeat that. Now, we also have other strategies. We have a growth strategy, venture capitalists and so forth. But we're investing in companies that are really exciting. One of the companies we invested in is not a public. This is not a public equity. This is growth. But we invested in a company called Fervo. Some of you may know about it. It's geothermal. They did a pilot project in Nevada. They're now doing a prototype, building it in Utah. They'll be delivering clean energy coming out of Mother Earth. 85% of the employees have come out of the drilling sector. And these guys are going to produce energy that's going to be clean. And if you talk about how we deal with the data centers, that's one of the ways we do it. I'm also extremely bullish, and we are, on nuclear.
Yeah. What should we be doing differently to go faster on nuclear?
In my judgment, what we need to do is create more of a consortia and bring people together and say, hey, guys, we don't have time to go down this field and individually, this investor, that investor, are going to look for their return on their particular approach. Let's get some kind of standardized production. Let's do this so that you don't run off with the way we went with Southern, where everything was a one-off.
Yeah.
And everything being a one-off ran the price up $30 billion. We can't get that's not going to work. So what we think we need to do is accelerate the development. A lot of money, I'll just share a couple of things with you here. The tailwinds are already showing up in terms of the capital flows here, and that's a real indicator. So global clean energy investment last year was $2.1 trillion versus fossil fuel, which was $1 trillion. It's the first time that's ever happened. Complete reversal. In addition, advanced nuclear has attracted $10 billion in the hyperscaler commitments that have been made. Next generation geothermal financing grew by 80% year to year. The money is moving, and the crisis is accelerating that. And the same thing is happening in the nuclear field. You have Amazon, Google, Microsoft commitments that have been made with respect to moving into nuclear in order to expedite its deployment. And firm, dispatchable, zero-carbon power is the asset class of this decade.
That's great point. And Larry, I wanted to just give you one more, in the brief time we have yet. I think you can beat Secretary Kerry's return figure. What were you telling me backstage? Your stock's up 250%.
250%
since you took over.
Since I took over, 74% last year, and I told you guys to buy it, and they did.
Well, that's before I came to the company.
Okay, fair enough. But actually,
before my time.
Utility stocks have across the board have been doing fairly well recently. Is that sustainable? Do you think we can keep that going?
I think we're only at the beginning of the demand super cycle. I think what we've spent the last couple of years doing is creating the best platform that we possibly could, both for new generation, but also for things we don't really have time to talk about, like demand response and virtual power plants, where we are also a leader, so that you can really provide solutions from everyone from the household to the hyperscaler. And that really has to be the goal, is to supply them firmly and reliably and sustainably as possible.
Larry Coben, Secretary John Kerry, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
For attending today's live journalism, and to our partner Mubadala. We hope to see you again tomorrow morning starting at 9 a.m. here at the Conrad.